chaired by Professor Aditya Bhattacharjea. Through the years, DSC has been fortunate to host various talks, lectures, conferences, and policy seminars, which have seen participation by leading academicians and researchers working in the frontiers of their fields of research. For instance, during the past winter school, we have had the privilege of hosting Professor Joel Mookherjee, whose work has since been recognized with the Nobel Prize in 2025. While we continue to host and engage in important academic and policy deliberations of the highest quality, we also felt the need to engage young researchers at the early stage of their academic and research careers. This led to the conception of the YSS, envisioned as a focused and interactive platform that places young scholars at the center of discussion. It offers an opportunity for participants from across India to present their work, build networks, and seek guidance from the faculty and fellow academicians. While other avenues exist at DSC to present the research, YSS is unique in that it actively handholds young scholars from central and state universities and other institutions, enabling them to participate at DSC without any financial obligations for travel and logistics. We have had the encouraging participation throughout all the YSS. This is the third edition of the YSS in a row, and many more to come. Let me now introduce the speaker, Professor Dilip Mookherjee. First of all, welcome back home, sir. Professor Mookherjee is a DSC alumnus, completed his MA from Delhi School of Economics. Professor Mookherjee is currently a professor at Boston University. He works on the combination of theoretical and empirical topics related to inequality, development, political economy and organization theory, entrepreneurship and marketing supply chains in Asia. Theoretical topics include corruption, automation, and globalization. He has been a co-editor of the Journal of Development Economics and Theoretical Economics, member of the Economic Development and Institutions Network, executive committee, and a member of the executive committee of the Econometric Society and lead academic for the India program of the International Growth Center. And let me now introduce the chair, Professor Aditya Bhattacharjea. Professor Bhattacharjea is currently a visiting professor at ISID, Institute of Studies for Industrial Development, New Delhi. Prior to this, he served as senior professor at Delhi School of Economics. He has also been the head of the Department of Economics at Delhi School of Economics. His area of research includes industrial organization, law and economics, competition antitrust law, labor market regulations and international trade. Most of the second-year students might know him by the Bhattacharjea paper on his critique of the best labor measure of labor regulations in India. Recently, he has been a member of the Competition Law Review Committee 2018-19 and the Committee on Digital Competition Law 2023-24. I have had the privilege of having him both as my teacher and as my colleague at Delhi School. With these words, I now invite both the speaker, Professor Mookherjee, and the chair, Professor Bhattacharjea, on the dais, and request the chair, Professor Bhattacharjea, to take over the proceedings of this session. Thank you. What do I do here?
Thank you, Varun, for that generous introduction, and it's nice to be back again. And thank you also for doing the hard work of summarizing Professor Mookherjee's vast CV, which I was prepared to do, putting in a lot of homework, but you have done the necessary hard work. Professor Mookherjee, for those of you who have read his work, you will know that he is a very creative scholar. He is able to descend from the heights of abstract economic theory and econometrics to the very grassroots to explore issues of local governance, political economy, and the actual working of markets, which may often depart from the way standard microeconomic models think they behave. And his research tries to adapt theory to take into account those realities, especially in developing countries. And I think today's presentation will be part of taking that research program forward. So without further ado, and standing between you and this very promising presentation, let me add my own welcome to Professor Mookherjee and invite him to speak to us on misallocation and SMEs. Now, in India, we usually refer to MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. I don't know which of the M's is missing in SMEs, but we will learn that from his presentation. Professor Mookherjee.
Thank you, Aditya. It's wonderful to be back here in this auditorium. My memory is going back 50 years. I was a young scholar and spent more time in this auditorium sitting there rather than here. Just walking the corridors here, enter through a different entrance, which I missed, walking through the front of the coffee house and watching the students sit and chat in the sun. I hope that is still going on. I hope to walk around later in the afternoon and to meet all of you. So it's a real pleasure also to be invited to speak at this conference and reach out on an ongoing project of mine, which is based on joint work with Maitresh Ghatak, Meet Shah, both of them at the LSE, and Kaivan Munshi at Yale. So an important question in development, in macro development in particular, is explaining differences in per capita incomes and growth rates across countries. And as you all know, the traditional approach based on the solo growth model focuses on the role of macro variables, differences in savings rates, population growth rates, human capital investments, access to technology. However, it's also well known that there's only so much progress you can make based on these aggregate determinants. And I guess the one ballpark number out there is that all the cross-country growth empirics shows that this accounts for maybe up to 60% of per capita income differences, which still leaves a substantial unexplained residual. And further work, sort of trying to understand the magnitude of the difference, let's say Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo's chapter in the Handbook of Macroeconomics, a long time ago, 20 years ago, argued that no matter how much you tweak the solo model, it just doesn't deliver. So this motivated examination of the role of cross-country variations in microeconomic distortions, which is commonly referred to as misallocation. So on my way into Delhi school, first year Delhi school student was sitting in the car with me, so I asked her, in your macro course, have you encountered the concept of misallocation? And she said no. So I said, okay, fine, I won't be boring you then entirely, because I'm going to talk about some of the very basic issues about misallocation. So what is misallocation? A very nice overview piece by Restuccia and Rogerson in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. So it refers to deviations from the first best allocation of labor and capital across producers of heterogeneous productivity. So think of there being a given set of firms. This is the simplest notion. Firms labeled subscript I. So its production function is product of a firm-specific TFP, which is ZI. And then there is a strictly concave production function, F, which is a function of capital and labor. And firms have a fixed cost, C. So whether a firm enters or not is endogenous. So now, given the aggregate endowments of the economy of labor and capital, the first best allocation is unique. Okay, you just want to maximize aggregate output. given the aggregate resource endowments. So, and that allocation will specify which firms should be active. That's the selection dimension, and allocation, which is of the active firms, how should the inputs be allocated across them. Deviation, so what we are interested in is deviations from this first best allocation, which results in productive inefficiency. And so this is a simple measure, the loss of aggregate output given the aggregate factor inputs. Or in other words, given the same aggregate endowments of labor and capital, how much more could this country produce? How much could it raise its GDP? Now, the earlier literature, which originated, probably the most important well-known paper is by Shea and Clenau in the QJE 2009, focused on exactly the notion that I mentioned now, static input misallocation amongst a given set of firms. Actually, they abstracted from the selection dimension. So they just took a given number of firms and then asked that second question, how do you, to what extent can you increase the output of an economy if the inputs are reallocated across already existing firms? The more recent literature in misallocation additionally incorporates dynamic misallocation, so distortions affecting entry, investment, and the growth rates of firms. And I'll be going there, so I'll be referring to this more recent literature. Now, some important qualifications on the concept. First, it refers only the yardstick here, the ultimate outcome that is of concern is per capita GDP. And that may not be a reliable measure of welfare. And this is again something we all know from our basic training in economics. If either there are market failures, for instance, environmental externalities, or if welfare includes distributional goals. And I'm going to stay away from this particular qualification. A second set of qualifications pertain to the way it has been measured, particularly in the Shea-Clenau paper, 2009, and a number of other people. So there are all kinds of empirical problems, biases resulting from measurement error. So the data is noisy, from the misspecification of technology. The functional forms that you assume, or what you assume about the pattern of shocks hitting firms or adjustment costs and so forth, all of that affect the way it should be measured. And so the early estimates, which ignored some of these complications, may have a lot of bias in it. I'm going to stay away from these critiques as well. So I'm going to focus on other possible reasons why misallocation may not be a reliable measure of welfare loss. Now, as a backdrop to what I want to focus on, just a little bit more detail on what we think of as the sources of misallocation. And I refer to microeconomic problems. So what do we mean by these microeconomic problems? So this is referred to as distortions, the various terms floating around. Distortions, frictions, wedges. So these are the three words that you will hear about repeatedly. I'll also probably cycle between them. And what are these frictions? These are gaps between the actual market returns or opportunities faced by firms or entrepreneurs from the first, what they ought to be facing in the first best allocation, the shadow prices. Now, in a perfectly functioning market economy with no distortionary taxes or regulations, the actual market returns would equal shadow prices. So that's what we learn in Econ 101, right? And in that case, there is zero misallocation. So that's the benchmark. So most of the macro literature focuses on estimating the size of the gaps between the actual prices, the actual returns, from the first best shadow prices. And the point I really want to make is that the macro literature has focused on just quantifying the magnitude of this gap, but not going so much into the source, the cause of these gaps. And that's what I want to enter into. So a recent review article that I wrote with Trish in the Annual Review of Economics, we argue it's really important to understand the sources of misallocation, and that's going to be the theme of what I'm going to talk about today. So now, what are the possible sources of misallocation? To name only one broad classification, it's between screw-ups by the government and problems with the market or institutional problems. So the policy distortions, what you might call government failure, owes from the existence of distorting taxes or regulations or other ways in which governments interfere with firms charging bribes, for instance. And these cause a wedge between the prices that the firm would face in the absence of these forms of government intervention and what they actually receive. Okay? So that's one source of misallocation distortions. The other that has actually received less attention in literature, and you might find that really surprising, and when you look around you and think about the problems that firms face, there are also important sources of market failure or institutional failures. So examples would be market imperfections, credit market imperfections, or monopoly power. The other would be weak enforcement of contracts and property rights owing to low state capacity. So I'm going to talk about these two competing explanations. So explanation one of wedges that we see, as measured by the macroeconomists, are progressive government policies. And specifically, this takes the form of higher taxes and regulations on large firms or more productive firms. Conversely, subsidies or exemptions for SMEs. And the policy implication of this view of the source of misallocation is that, well, the policy implication is, in order to increase macroeconomic performance, to increase GDP, you should remove these size-based distortions. Explanation two is, I'm going to focus on credit market imperfections. Now, these are not the only two. Okay? There are a whole list of other possible explanations emanating from various sources of market failure. But just for today, I'm going to focus on credit market imperfections. So in this view, and this is also a well-known view in the microeconomics of development, which is credit market imperfections, entrepreneurs face borrowing constraints. And these constraints bind more in poorer countries, and within poorer countries, more for poorer entrepreneurs. And the policy implication is that what you need to correct this source of misallocation is pro-SME policies, because it's the SME entrepreneurs who are facing these problems in particular. Now, what we are going to argue is, if you work through models of progressive government policies, is one possible explanation for observed cross-country patterns in misallocation. What you have to do is check whether there are alternative explanations that can also account for the same empirical patterns. Okay, so the way one would discipline the empirical exercise is, well, if we are trying to nail down what the explanation is, we have to write down a model, a theoretical model of that explanation, generate predictions, and test it in the data. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to first show you existing cross-country empirical patterns of misallocation that need to be explained by any theory. And then I'm going to argue that explanation one does provide a coherent explanation of those facts. But then I'm going to go on and argue that explanation two also accounts for the same set of facts. So we have a multiplicity of explanations for the same set of facts. And then finally, I'm going to argue that these two explanations have very different policy implications, roughly along the lines of what is written on this slide. And so we have a problem. We don't really know what the sources of misallocation are, according to existing research at the frontier. So the task for future research is to work hard in trying to disentangle the relative importance of these two sources. So the outline of the talk is, I'm going to first give you a background on how it's measured, and then some of the basic cross-country misallocation patterns. Then I'm going to go to the explanations, the two sets of explanations and the contrasting policy implications. And then if I have some time at the end, I don't know who's keeping track of time. Aditya, is there a clock I can, I see a clock there. So how much time do I have for speaking?
You can take another half an hour, half an hour, 35 minutes.
But you said you'd give me 60 minutes for talking from the time I start, right? So.
And for Q&A also. You have 1 hour from now, you split whichever way you would like.
I have an hour from now?
Including the
Including the Q&A. Okay, wonderful. Then I'm okay. Then I don't need to rush. Okay, so I'll probably have time to talk about additional issues associated with networks and clusters. And then I'll end. Okay. Is there any water? Thank you so much.
Shall I keep the bottle here?
Yeah, why not? Okay, so let me start by describing how misallocation is measured. And I'll start with an example of where it's being generated by tax distortions. So let's say we have n firms with heterogeneous given levels of total factor productivity Zi, producing a homogeneous good that employs labor HI and also chooses capital input KI. And this is a standard Cobb-Douglas production function with diminishing returns to scale. Now this firm I faces a proportional tax rate. And the key is that this tax rate is indexed by the firm identity, I. So it varies across firms. So it could be negative for some firms. Some firms are being subsidized, and others are facing positive taxes because the government has to balance its budget. This aggregate supply of labor and capital is given. There's an endogenous real wage rate and an interest rate. And we just convenient simplifying assumption, just think of a small open economy, so the product price is normalized to 1. So a competitive equilibrium is, firms maximize profits by choosing employment and capital, given the factor prices they face and the tax rates that they confront, to maximize their after-tax profits. So after-tax profits is 1 minus tau I, is what they retain from what they produce, from their revenues, which is given by the production function. You subtract the factor costs. And this generates factor demands, and the aggregate supply of capital and labor is inelastic, so you require factor markets to clear. And that's how the factor prices are determined. Okay, so all that is straightforward. So I can see you're beginning to fall asleep. First order conditions. All right, so what are the first order conditions? After tax marginal products, okay? So 1 minus tau I is the after what the firm retains, and then the marginal product. Cobb-Douglas implies marginal products are proportional to average products, right? So it's the average product. So it's a product of the fraction retained by the firm and its average product scaled up by the corresponding exponent on the production function. That's the left-hand side, okay? Is equal to the wage rate, and similarly for capital. Now stare at this for a minute, and you say, well, what's supposed to happen in the first best? The first best, marginal products have to be equated across all firms. In fact, average products are proportional to marginal products. Average products have to be equated across all firms. That would happen if the tax rates were all the same. Okay, but the tax rates need not be the same, and that's the source of the misallocation, right? But this instantly tells you, given the assumptions already made, you have a measure of the tax rate. Now, the tax rate may be difficult to estimate because the tax rate may be a consequence of all kinds of regulations, corruption, and so on. Those you cannot measure. So what you want to back out from the data is what is the firm's effective tax rate, okay? And what this tells you, this is very powerful because it tells you that one way of backing that out is just looking at the variation of the average products across firms, okay? And it doesn't matter which one you look at, labor or capital, okay? Because it's proportional to the same expression on the right-hand side, which is monotonic in the tax rate. So what is easier to measure? Employment. So let's just go with that, the average product of labor. So keep that in mind. The first measure of misallocation or tax distortions is going to be measured by the variation in average product of labor across firms. Okay. So now, based on this idea, Sheikh-Lenau's 2009 paper showed that if you make a few more additional assumptions, so Cobb-Douglas was one of them, and they made additional distributional assumptions. The loss in GDP per capita, when you aggregate it up and compute the aggregate loss, you that loss can be measured by the standard deviation of the log of the average product. Okay, and that's called the firm wedge. So the measure of misallocation is the economy-wide dispersion in the firm wedges as measured by the average product of labor. Okay, let's think about that a little bit more. So the average product of labor is varying across firms, and that's the symptom of misallocation. And as I mentioned, because capital is often unobserved or mismeasured, you can have two measures of TFP, but the true TFP may be hard to measure because you have to sort of clean out the role of capital. So forget about that. Lump capital with the sort of, let's say, the entrepreneurial ability, ZI, and sort of create this more composite notion of firm TFP, which is the product of the, let's say, the entrepreneur's ability, ZI, and the capital that is actually endogenous. So TFP tilde is going to be this sort of more composite notion of TFP, which is actually easier to measure because it's actually equal to the, it just depends on data on firm revenues and employment. Now, if this elasticity is positive, so we're looking at the elasticity of the average product of labor with a measure of firm productivity. Okay, so one source of misallocation may be that more productive firms are getting taxed more. Okay, so if this elasticity is positive, if that's what actually is happening, then intuitively what is happening is that GDP per capita is low in an economy because there is a bias in the allocation of factor inputs in favor of less productive firms. Okay, the more productive firms are not hiring as much labor as they would in a first best. Okay, because they face higher taxes. What does that also additionally imply? It implies that firm size does not vary as much as with TFP as it would in a first best. So you should see a lot of dispersion in employment across firms based on variations in productivity. If you see that all firms, despite variations in TFP, are employing pretty much the similar number of workers, that's a symptom of misallocation. Because employment should be varying with productivity. So now the model that I wrote down implies that the elasticity of employment with respect to measured TFP, okay, it should be 1 by 1 minus gamma, okay, where gamma is the share of labor in national income. And that may not be the case because there is a residual which depends on the tax rate. So if the tax rate is higher for the more productive firms, then the measured correlation between employment and TFP would be smaller than it ought to be. Okay, so for instance, if that elasticity is 0, it indicates a high level of misallocation. Okay, I hope you haven't fallen asleep totally. All this is very, very basic. Okay, but so based on these ideas, Shea and Klenow obtained aggregate estimates of misallocation for 3 countries, the US, India, and China. And they found 100% loss in aggregate output in China and India owing to misallocation, compared to 30% for the US. So this was kind of the big headline number in Shea and Klenow. So a substantial fraction of the difference in per capita output between the US and developing countries, China and India, is accounted for by misallocation. So their approach has been subject to a lot of critiques and so forth, many papers pointing out, sort of chipping away at this estimate. And it's been extended, so they only compare 3 countries, Shea and Klenow. It's been extended recently in a sequence of papers by Diego Restuccia with various co-authors and by himself to cross-country comparisons among large number of developed and developing countries using different cross-country data sets, Orbis, the World Bank Economic Survey. So I'm going to show you some of the plots from Restuccia's work. So I'm just going to focus on his most recent paper, which is based on the World Bank enterprise surveys. So these are nationally representative firm level surveys with top managers and owners of firms. More than 100 countries are covered. They have standardized measures of sales and employment. And in most cases, establishment level measures are residualized by removing country, sector, year fixed effects. GDP per worker capita is taken from the Penn World tables. And qualification, one problem with the World Bank Economic Survey is that they undersample the really small firms. So if you're interested in micro, not just small and medium, but real micro, the micro firms are missing. Okay. Okay, so first fact, the Sheklenau measure of misallocation is the dispersion in the average product of labor, okay, the firm wedge. Is that higher in developing countries? Yes. So if you plot the standard deviation of the log wedge across countries varying with in per capita income, that's on the horizontal axis, the aggregate labor productivity of the economy, you see this significant downward sloping pattern. So what Sheklenau found in their comparison of the three countries does indeed extend when you look at all countries. Second, how does employment vary with TFP at the firm level? Okay, and if there's no variation in misallocation across countries, that elasticity should be the same across all countries. It is not. And what you find is that the employment TFP elasticity is smaller in poorer countries, which again is consistent with the tax explanation that I just explained. Because if you're taxing the more productive firms, it means that the more productive firms are not employing as many more workers as they should be relative to the less productive firms. Okay. Third, what is the elasticity of the wedge with respect to the TFP? Okay, are more productive firms getting taxed more? And the answer is yes. Okay, so the wedge TFP elasticity is indeed higher in developing countries. So the cross-country facts are indeed consistent with the tax-based notion, notion that it's progressivity of government distorting regulations that is responsible for the misallocation. So how does this tie in with SMEs, which is the topic of this workshop? So now if you think about it, large productive firms, according to these patterns, they are experiencing higher wedges. Conversely, unproductive firms are being taxed less or being subsidized, SMEs. So lower average firm productivity, economy-wide, what is happening is that the productive entrepreneurs are not as large as, their firms are not as large as they ought to be, and the small firms are larger than they ought to be, okay? And this lowers aggregate firm productivity in the economy. This in turn implies a lower aggregate demand for labor, so there aren't enough good jobs. And that in turn, given that if you assume that the stock of labor is fixed, wages are lower in poor countries. Wages lower in poor countries, you have endogenous entry into the firm sector. This implies a larger fraction of firms are SMEs, because the opportunity cost of entrepreneurship is working on the labor market. But lack of good jobs and low wages implies that more people enter into the entrepreneurship. So you're getting a lot of very small, unproductive firms. Is that true? Yes. So when you look at the average firm size, it's increasing with per capita income. If you're looking at small firms, poorer countries have more SMEs. Okay? And this is, of course, recall that we are missing all the micro firms, right? So if we added that in, it would be much more, the slope would be much steeper. And specifically in the World Bank Economic Survey, compare the United States and India. You can do this for any pair of countries, but what you see is that almost 50%, more than 50% of the firms in India at the lower end are less productive than the least productive firm in the US. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of the dimension of the SME issue. Okay. So all this illustrates the possibility that one source of misallocation is the presence of distorting government taxes and regulations that impose a much higher burden on more productive entrepreneurs. And so what as Nguyen and Restuccia, so this is a NBR working paper from 2 years ago, they showed that now you can write down a structural model from TFP, which is has a certain elasticity with respect to the productivity of the firm, and the hypothesis that the progressivity of taxes with respect to productivity is higher in poorer countries fits the moments that I have already shown you. But of course, what they're doing here is they're measuring the wedges as the way I explained to you. They're not actually using data on actual policies. Because they say, well, we can't do it, right? Because the policies are so complex. So we're just backing out the wedges. Then we are saying, well, let's suppose that they're all coming from distorted government policies, okay? And then the hypothesis that these policies are imposing a bigger burden on the more productive entrepreneurs is consistent with all the observed facts. Okay, but so that's the qualification that you should keep in mind. Okay, now let's go to the other possible explanation that Moitresh and I and Meet Shah are pushing, which is that, well, maybe alternative explanation is that we have more SMEs in poorer countries, is that entrepreneurs face greater barriers to accessing credit because of weaker credit market institutions. So what we do is develop a model of credit market imperfections, and this is based on another influential paper in the macro development literature by Boera, Kabowski, and Shin. And then what we are going to do is show that it is also capable of explaining exactly the same cross-country facts that I showed you. So let me tell you a little bit about the model. Agents now vary on two dimensions. So entrepreneurs differ not only in their intrinsic productivity or ability, which was the Z, but also in a measure of wealth, which is more precisely amount of collateralizable assets that you can use to obtain a loan. And so now we have a world where we have two-dimensional heterogeneity of agents. And we're going to assume that ability and wealth are either uncorrelated, that's a simpler case, or if they are correlated, they are positively correlated. More able entrepreneurs, because they've attained higher profits in the past and saved it and so on, are wealthier. Now, access to credit is limited. So those who have enough assets that they can pay the wage bill and pay for the equipment that they want just out of their own resources, they don't need to borrow. But for those entrepreneurs who don't have enough, okay, then they need to borrow to be able to operate a firm of the size that they would like to. So then they approach they approach lenders, but they can't commit to repaying the loan. Because at the end of the day, you get the loan, you produce and so forth, and then when it comes to repay the bank, there are all kinds of problems banks have in recovering loans. And we are, of course, familiar with all these problems. And at that point, it becomes an enforcement of credit contracts, debt recovery, and so forth, and bankruptcy rules. And so that involves a whole machinery of courts and governments and debt recovery and so forth. Okay. So now suppose that countries vary in the quality of those institutions. Okay, and some countries have weaker institutions. So countries with weaker credit institutions, poor entrepreneurs will be able to borrow less because they have less wealth, which they can pledge as a way of committing to repaying their loans. So countries with weaker credit institutions will feature more SMEs. These are entrepreneurs who are unable, given their assets, to be able to operate a firm of the size that they would really like to, given the ongoing factor prices. The other feature we're going to add is some increasing returns for firms operating at a low scale. Okay, so here is a picture. I'm going to modify the concave production function with a initial phase of small scale. Firms that operate at small scale may be experiencing local increasing returns. Okay, until they reach a technically efficient scale, which is SE, after which diminishing returns set in. So this is, you can think of this is sort of the technical efficient capacity level of the firm. Okay, and what it means is that firms that will be operating at really small scales, as you can see, the average product is going to be very low because they're not being able to scale up the extent that they would in order to increase their productivity. So I'm going to add this other feature. So apart from the credit market institutions, phase of initial increasing returns. And we're going to classify firms into 3 categories. This is going to be an endogenous outcome. Firm is small, those who end up producing below SE, the technically efficient level. Medium are those firms that produce above the technically efficient level, but not at the first best profit maximizing level because of the credit constraint. So they're credit constrained, but they're operating over the decreasing returns. Okay, so they are the wealthier entrepreneurs relative to the small entrepreneurs. Okay, so I don't know what the micro is going to be, but maybe at the very low end. Okay, that's the micro, and then anyway, so you can split the small into a micro and a small. Okay, and then there are going to be the large firms. This is just a conceptual definition. We will call a firm large if it is not experiencing any credit constraints. Okay, and of course, this is relative to the ability of the entrepreneur. So they're producing at the first best scale. Okay, so now if you crunch through this model, this is a standard model in micro development, and you solve for the equilibrium of the economy. This is what the ultimate allocation looks like. So here I'm plotting. I'm plotting. Sorry, theta is the ability of the entrepreneur. Sorry, I've actually switched notation here. So this was Z before, but this is ability of the entrepreneur. And on the vertical axis, I have the wealth, the assets of the entrepreneur. And what the outcome is, agents below a certain critical threshold of ability do not enter. They just go work on the labor market. Okay, that's even in the first best. Okay, so obviously these people are not going to operate, be functional even in a world with imperfect credit market institutions. Now, if your ability crosses that threshold, so you would be an active entrepreneur in the first best world, whether or not you'd be active would depend on how much wealth you have. So now let's fix one such ability. If your wealth is below a certain threshold, you decide to stay out. Okay, you don't become an entrepreneur. You go and work in the labor market. Okay. If it crosses a certain threshold, okay, you do decide to enter, but then you enter at a very small scale. Okay, because you can't borrow enough. All right, and as your wealth increases, okay, your scale increases until you get to the point where you can operate a firm at the technically efficient level. And that's where you become medium. Okay, and then you go further. You're medium. You're increasing your scale as your asset is going up because you're able to finance a larger factor bill until you get to the unconstrained first best level. Okay, and above that you're large. So basically, you get this classification of active firms into small, medium, and large. Okay, and this you can't get a closed form expression for these functions, but you can get pretty close. You can solve this on a computer quite easily. And now, just another way of dissecting this if you fix ability, then and I just vary the assets of an agent below a certain level, those guys don't enter. Then these are the small ones that enter, and their scale goes up to the technically efficient level. So this is the small range. This is above the technically efficient level, but not the first best. And then eventually you've got the large. Yeah.
So on the left-hand side panel, are you showing the averages, or there are some?
No, this is the micro detail. So give me an agent with a specific combination of ability and wealth. This is what that agent will be doing. If that agent is active, this is the kind of firm that he's operating.
So why is that? What is driving this lumpiness, the clustering along these three?
Because of the variation in wealth. So agents vary, so the distribution over wealth. So there's a given distribution of wealth over agents and a given distribution of ability in the economy. So there are these two dimensions of heterogeneity in the economy.
It's sufficient to get.
Is what exactly generates this.
Or there's something in the credit market that.
Oh yes, yes,
assets
right.
above certain thresholds will give you.
This is exact. So the credit limits are being solved optimally by lenders. So there's a whole model of the credit market and so on that I don't have time to show you. I'm just telling you what the outcome is of our model. Okay? Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. Now, what kind of TFP and wedge variation do you get with wealth, holding ability fixed? So again, let's hold the ability fixed theta. Let me just consider this particular level of theta. Later on, you can consider what happens when the ability goes up. So if you fix it at theta, then the firms that enter are the ones whose size, they enter with the smallest size of a small firm. And then as their wealth increases, the firm's size is bigger. As the firm's size is bigger, because of the local increasing returns pattern, the average product of the firm is increasing. And that, recall, is the measure of the firm wedge. So the firm wedge, W, is increasing over that range until you get to the technically efficient level. After that, diminishing returns is kicking in, so then the wedge is going down until you get to the first best. After that, the first best, it's constant. All right? Now go to an agent of higher ability. This is how the corresponding wedge function looks like, and these are the corresponding TFP functions. So what's happening is that the wedge is moving up as wealth goes up from the small, within the small range, okay? But TFP is also going up because the firm is becoming more productive. So the wedge TFP correlation is going to be positive for the small firms. For the medium firms, the wedge TFP correlation is ambiguous because there are, if you look at the effect of varying wealth, okay, the correlation is negative because the wedge is falling because of diminishing returns to scale, but TFP is going up because these firms are now investing in more capital. Okay. But if you look at variations in ability, then ability increases both the wedge, the average product of labor, as well as TFP. So this source of correlation is positive. So which one wins between these two effects depends on the parameters of the economy, okay, and how much scale economy there is and how ability and wealth are correlated, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an empirical fact that depends on the empirical patterns, okay. And finally, when you get to the large firms, what is the variation in the wedge across all large firms? Is anybody awake? That variation, no? No, that wedge is constant across all large firms, okay? So the wedge TFP correlation is going to be 0 for large firms, okay? All right, so armed with this, now imagine different countries have different credit enforcement institutions. It's the average product of labor for large firms. The average product of labor is going to be positive for a functioning firm. The variation is 0, but the wedge itself is positive. Okay, so now suppose different countries differ in the quality of the credit market institutions, okay? Or additionally, countries differ in terms of the wealth distribution. Some countries are intrinsically poorer, okay? So either of the two will generate the patterns that I'm going to talk about. All other fundamentals are the same: technology, ability, endowments. Then countries with a weaker credit system will feature a larger fraction of SMEs that will achieve lower TFP compared to large firms. And what will that generate? Greater dispersion in firm size, dispersion in TFP, and dispersion in the average product of labor. So the Sheikh-Lenau finding of greater dispersion of average product of labor in developing countries could be driven by this source of variation, okay, rather than tax distortions. So that's the first point. That's correct.
And so it seems to me that unless the alternative explanation that you have, which is tax policy, unless that is also affecting ability in some way across the different firm types, it seems that the wedges in your model will be smaller than they would be in that other.
No, but that the tax policy would affect selection of firms into, yeah. Right. So what is the TFP wedge correlation? So one of the patterns, one of the facts that we're trying to fit is the TFP wedge correlation larger in poorer countries? Well, the TFP wedge correlation is positive for small firms. I just showed you that. It's ambiguous for medium firms, and it's 0 for large firms because wedge doesn't vary across. So now just have this thought experiment. Consider a poor country. Most firms are SMEs. The correlation will be positive. Compare it with a rich country where most firms are large firms. The correlation will be 0. Therefore, the wedge TFP correlation is going to be higher and positive in the poorer country. So that was one of the facts. Okay. So now, first, do we believe credit market institutions? Is there empirical evidence that credit market institutions are weaker in poor countries? Well, there's a very nice paper by Jankov, Oliver Hart, Andre Schleifer, and so on. In the JPE 2008, they show wide variation of debt recovery rates across countries. And one clear, robust fact is that the debt recovery rates are significantly lower in poorer countries. World Bank Economics survey data, they also ask the entrepreneurs, what is the biggest obstacle to you in operating your firm? Okay, let me show you the aggregate statistics for different regions of the world. The single largest obstacle faced by entrepreneurs is access to finance. Okay, 17% say that is the biggest problem. The next one is tax rates, 13%. When you look at the distribution across regions of the world, access to finance is listed by, especially by entrepreneurs in South Asia, 17%, MENA, which is Middle East and North Africa, 17%, East Asia, 16.8%. And it's small in North America, 5.9%. In Latin America, it's 12.4%. In Europe, it's 9.8%. So entrepreneurs in poorer countries are saying credit is a bigger problem. Okay? So both on average as well as the pattern of variation is consistent with the credit story. And of course, there are many other possible instances. I'm just focusing on the top 2 here on this list. So again, more systematically, the percentage of firms who report that they're credit constrained varies very significantly across countries. And in countries of low per capita income, the average proportion is close to 50 to 60%, and it declines sharply with level of per capita income. So do the predictions of our credit model match the cross-country facts? So we are currently working on calibrating our model to examine this question. But I can just show you some simulations generated by some parameter values. So here in the simulations, we keep the same fundamentals, but we change the intensity of borrowing constraints. Okay, and so this is the TFP distribution across firms. The blue is for the low credit constraint. Okay, so this is the developed country, and the green is the low credit constraints, and then there is an intermediate case of medium credit constraints. And you see that the pattern that you see is very similar to what we saw when we did the USA-India comparison. Okay, so when you look at the least productive active firm in the low credit constraint case, the blue, okay, and then about 80 to 90% of the firms in the green are operating below that. And these are the other 2 major facts. Average firm size is increasing in level of per capita income, and the standard deviation of TFP, this is the Sheikh-Lanao measure of misallocation, is substantially higher in poorer countries. And then finally, how does the wedge elasticity, this is the elasticity of the wedge with respect to TFP, is significantly higher in poorer countries. Okay? So it's basically that initial increasing returns range and the positive elasticity we were getting from the small firms is consistent with what you see over here with the preponderance of small firms in poorer countries. Okay, so now I hope I've tried to argue that either of these 2 explanations can account for the existing cross-country facts of misallocation. So we don't really know what is the true source of misallocation. Well, do we care? Do we care which one it is? Well, it depends on welfare and policy implications. Okay? So here is now a theorem that we prove, which says, suppose an economy has no tax interventions. It's a laissez-faire economy. And it has imperfect credit enforcement institutions. Okay, and just the only restriction we're going to do, we're going to put no restrictions on the distribution of ability and wealth. No restrictions on the production function. I don't even need increasing returns, anything like that for this. The only restriction I need is that there is enough, credit enforcement institutions are imperfect, so some firms are credit constrained, but the extent of imperfection is not too severe. And this is just for technical reasons. Okay. Then there exists a policy providing an entry subsidy for small firms, which is financed by a fixed tax paid by all firms above a given size threshold. This policy will increase per capita, GDP per capita. So therefore, the welfare implication of the credit market story is the exact opposite of that of the tax policy, because the tax policy says, take an otherwise first-best economy, the market institutions work perfectly, and the misallocation is generated by tax distortions. Well, this is Econ 101. If you want productive efficiency, get rid of the taxes. All right? But if it's being generated by the credit market imperfection, you should do exactly the opposite. You should actually have a progressive policy which favors small and medium enterprises and taxes the large firms to pay for it. So that's kind of the main point that I'm trying to make in this lecture. So you really it's very important to know what is the true source of misallocation. And the current state-of-the-art research techniques in macro development, there is just no way of trying to discriminate between competing explanations. And here I think we need micro and macro development to come together. We need methods of causal inference to be able to tell in a given context what is the true source of misallocation. That's the point that we are trying to make here. Okay, so one last issue that I have time, I'll take about 5 minutes, okay? And then that'll leave 20 minutes for Q&A. Now, the literature on SMEs that I don't really know the literature that well, but some of what I have read and found really interesting is that they often involve production clusters in various industries, particularly in the low sort of skill, low sort of more labor intensive manufacturing sector, textiles, garments, gems, auto parts, etc. So there are a bunch of case studies in India and China, for instance, to name only a few. So well known is the study of the Tirupur garment industry, knitwear industry by Banerjee and Munshi. And then a whole bunch of case studies in China. So just to give you an example, this is a paper from EDCC 2009 by Ruan and Zhang on the Puan sweater industry. What these clusters have are the following features. Firm size is very small, okay? And part of the reason that these entrepreneurs say that they enter at such a small scale is because of borrowing constraints, okay? So what happens is that a whole group of entrepreneurs enter. So let's say they've got to produce a shirt. What they do is they break down the production process of a shirt into many fine stages. So somebody's working on the yarn, somebody's working on the dyeing, somebody's doing the stitching, somebody's putting the buttons, somebody's ironing it. So what happens in a large firm in a Western country is that there is one firm that all these stages are represented within the same firm. What happens in Tirupur or in Puyan is different. Each of these stages is a separate firm that's specializing in it. Somebody's just doing buttons, somebody's just doing ironing. And they all work together. So there's a high degree of vertical disintegration, high degree of specialization. There's mutual subcontracting. So basically, the shirt is sort of being bumped from across these entrepreneurs within the cluster. Okay, somebody's getting the yarn, sending it to the guy who's actually going to do the stitching, and then somebody's going to put the buttons, and then somebody's going to iron it, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be a lot of of outsourcing, so to speak. Okay, so the guy who's eventually selling the shirt, the finished shirt, is subcontracting the various parts from the earlier stages who are other firms in the same cluster. A lot of information is shared by these. What are prevailing market conditions? A lot of equipment is shared. So there are a lot of lumpy investment equipment. They will all share it. And then they will borrow and lend to each other. They will insure each other. And they will give referrals to each other when they're all trying to now contract with other people outside the cluster. So this is what a cluster looks like. That's the ecosystem of a lot of SMEs, or successful SMEs in, let's say, India and China. And one thing that sort of is the glue for this to all work is a high level of mutual trust. Because these guys, for instance, are helping each other. There's a lot of sort of, let's say, borrowing and lending, right? And so you got to trust that somebody you lend money to will actually repay you. Somebody you say that, I will deliver to you the shirts by such and such a date will actually do so. That the shirts will be good shirts, right? And so forth. So in an environment where attempting to obtain reliable factor inputs is problematic because of weak property rights, weakly functioning courts, and so forth, you rely on people you know personally, who you can trust. So it requires some kind of a common social bond. Okay, so quite often there is a common social community network, caste, jati, and in the Chinese case, hometown networks amongst entrepreneurs, common birthplace, same clan, etc. So it's not just an economic integration, it's also based on a common social origin, a social community level. So what happens between these firms? If you think of these firms, in the data they will all appear as separate firms, but then just because of this greater degree of vertical disintegration, an economy that relies on a cluster will just mechanically show more SMEs. Even though collectively they might be end up doing quite the same as what a Western firm would be, that Western textile firm would be a lot larger. The second important thing, so this may be part of the explanation that we have more SMEs, but also what's going to happen is that you're going to get substantial productivity and cost spillovers across members of the cluster. So that assumption that was written into that tax distortion model was a first best model, where there are no externalities across firms. So if you really want to take this aspect of cluster seriously, you have to think that there may be important spillovers across firms. So the market economy may not be efficient because of the existence of these spillovers. So then you may ask, well, is there causal evidence of such spillovers? So this is something I've been working on with, so there's been a project with Kaiwan Munshi in a variety of contexts. In fact, last time I was at Delhi School, I gave a talk on the cotton textile industry in the 19th century, which was based on a model of such spillovers. And I was arguing that there are these caste networks were very important. And in the work that I'm doing currently with Kaiwan and Rochen Dai and Xiaobo Zhang, we have access to excellent data, panel data from a Chinese firm database, and we provide causal evidence of such network spillovers amongst small firms in particular, where owners belong to a common hometown network. Now, these inter-firm spillovers has important implications, both for the measurement of firm productivity, and in particular, what happens is that if you focus on measuring the productivity just based on the own revenue of that particular firm, you're missing the contribution of that firm that it is making to other firms in the same cluster. So you're really underestimating the productivity of any given firm. So these spillovers represent an important externality that is ignored by the standard macro model, and they represent a form of market failure. So there's a theoretical paper that's up on my website that Kaiwan and I have written. They have complex effects on how misallocation is measured and on welfare. So here is just, I don't have the time to go into the details of that model, but let me just communicate some of the findings in that paper. and the intuition. So let's say you have two social groups. There's one with strong ties and another with weak ties. The strong tie network, let me call it the S network. The S network has high spillovers. And so as a result of that, factor costs are going to be lower in the strong network entrepreneurial group, the S cluster. So there's going to be a dispersion of factor costs between the strong and the weak network. That is going to generate standard deviation. That's going to generate variation in firm wage, because variations in factor costs, the underlying assumption in the first best tax distortion model is that factor prices are the same, but the factor prices are not the same because of the cost spillovers. So you'll get a certain degree of Shea-Klenow measured dispersion of wedges that are being generated by the dispersion of the strength of spillovers across diverse networks. So that's one point. Second, entry decisions are inefficient here because firms are still motivated by self-interest. So when an agent decides whether or not to enter, he's going to be looking at consequences for his own profit, but he will ignore the benefit of his spillovers that he generates for the rest of the community in the cluster. So there's too little entry. And this would imply that there would be welfare improvements that would result if you were to subsidize entry. Moreover, the optimal subsidy is going to depend on the strength of network ties. And for the S network, the spillovers are stronger, the subsidy should be larger. So now you get the S network has more SMEs because of the strong spillovers, the network effects. You have more agents entering there, and most of this additional entry happens at the lower end of the ability spectrum. So you get more small firms entering. And then when you look at the dispersion of costs between the strong network and the weak network, okay, these firms have lower costs. And their size is much smaller. What an optimal policy should do should be to subsidize entry to increase further the SMEs in the S network, which will increase the measured misallocation a la Shea-Klenow, because the dispersion between the strong network and the weak network will actually become stronger. So welfare and measured misallocation are moving in opposite directions. Okay, so let me conclude here. So I think the macro development literature has generated a very important contribution in focusing on the role of microeconomic distortions in explaining differences in per capita income between rich and poor countries. However, these have multiple potential explanations, and these have very different implications for welfare and policy choice. So successful calibration of models based on a single explanation is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And my dissatisfaction with the macro literature is precisely this. They write down something like a tax distortion model, it fits the moments, they're done. I don't think they're done. I think we have to think of competing explanations, particularly ones which have very different welfare implications. And then the really important task for future research, which all the young scholars here, I'm sure we can now pass the ball to them, is to now merge the micro and the macro. So use causal inference methods to test and quantify the relative importance of different explanations. Okay. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Dilip. Well, as I said in the introduction, Professor Mookherjee is an extremely creative scholar who applies theoretical and empirical techniques to reopen certain issues which have come to be established conventional wisdom in economic theory. And what he has presented today is an outstanding example of that kind of work. So we have about 15 minutes for a question and answer session. Since this is a Young Scholars Symposium, I'd like to give priority to the young scholars, which means people beyond the first two rows to begin with. And I'll come back to my former colleagues who are in the first two rows, who I'm sure also have questions to ask. So starting from the back. Yeah, yes, please, go ahead.
Hello, sir. My question is that for economies like India, reason 2 seems like a follow up on reason 1 because we are a bit lower on the industrialization ladder. So the government has to have progressive policies. But then our targets are not met because maybe of the existence of imperfect credit markets. And then for economies like the US, only one of these two reasons seem to be in action. So how are we parallelly comparing such economies in this model?
Thank you. That's a great question. So yeah, there's a lot that I've left out. So if poorer countries are having these more distortive, more progressive tax policies, nobody's answered why. Why is that happening? And you're suggesting an important reason for that, which is that the country that is poorer is confronting a bigger problem of poverty. And because welfare depends not only on per capita income, but also on distribution, so the more progressive policies may be a response to that, an optimal response to that. So you have more progressive policies precisely because the country is poor. So that's what you're arguing, right? And so that may be a reason why you see more tax distortions in poorer countries. But then the problem that the macro guys are coming back with, they said, fine, but do you understand the distortionary cost of this policy? Maybe this is a misguided policy because this is continuing to keep you poor. So your country is not developing because you have these distorting tax policies. Maybe you should do something else. And so, for instance, there's an interesting paper by Ichoki and Moll in Econometrica about 3-4 years ago. They said, well, you can maybe do other things to help small entrepreneurs. What the South Koreans did in the 60s and the 70s, they went in for repressive labor policies. So they basically said unions, said out with unions, okay? And essentially it was a very pro-employer policy. That helped small entrepreneurs. That's their argument. And so it created a lot of very active entry into entrepreneurship. And those firms eventually became larger as they grew. And so a large part of Korean success, they argue, this is not an empirical paper, it's a theoretical argument. Okay, in the long run, this was good for Korean workers. So the workers of the 60s suffered in Korea, but eventually they paved the way for a vibrant, productive Korean industrial economy that generated jobs 30 years later. And so workers in the 90s and thereafter benefited from that policy. So maybe a more far-sighted policy along the lines of the Korean strategy would be, okay, you've got to sort of swallow the bitter pill and choose not progressive taxes, but the opposite, in some ways, squeeze labor more, okay? And in the long run, this is a way for you to escape the poverty trap. But of course, Korea was, at that time, was a military dictatorship, right? So there are political economy obstacles to it. So I guess the richer story would be to explain why there are more tax distortions in poor countries, and maybe there are political economy reasons. And then it becomes a more interesting mix, right? So suggests that political economy of democracy may be contributing to a poverty trap. That's the tax distortion view of the world, okay? So I think your point is well taken. So if you believe that tax distortions are the villain of the piece, then that would suggest that maybe you should be thinking about the long run instead of just the short run. And when you think of inequality or poverty reduction, take a long run view. I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying that that is a way of sort of extending the tax distortion view of the world to confront the problem that you just highlighted.
So we are discounting the present welfare for the future.
Yeah.
Depends how many he wants to handle at one go. Okay, let's take okay, two or three at a time. Yes.
Hello. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Priyanshu from MA first year. As far as I understood this lecture, the credit market inefficiency leads to the tax disparity, which both of them are trying to correct the gap.
So
in the
let me stop you there. Sorry, I did not do a good job. The tax disparity story is one story which is not connected at all with the credit story. They are two different stories. They are two alternative stories.
But but if there exists tax disparity, credit market disparity in a country, you will require disproportionate taxes in order to.
No, I just gave you an example of an economy with a laissez-faire economy with no government taxes whatsoever. But the only imperfection is in the credit market.
But in that economy, wouldn't it be wiser to have a progressive tax policy in order?
That's exactly the theorem I proved.
Yeah.
So okay, yes, go on. All right, so I'm with you now. Okay, I see
Yeah.
where you're going.
So with a progressive tax policy,
Yeah.
and a credit market imperfection state, they both are kind of working at the opposing ends to correct the market gap which exists in the country.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So can we have an equilibrium similar to, let's say, zero, a laissez-faire, a uniform tax rate, and no credit market inefficiency, the same equilibrium? Can we have a homogeneous equilibrium in both of these cases?
But that's the first best that you're describing. There are no tax distortions, there's no credit imperfection, that's the first best economy. So, but the thing is the credit market institutions are coming from an institutional problem. So you have to first consider what kind of a country that you're talking about. Is it a country with a good set of functioning courts and so on, or is it not? And that you have to take as given. Because that, that's a problem of state capacity, right? It's an institutional problem. It's not a sort of macro policy issue. So I think what we're taking this view is that we take as similar to endowments, right? What technology you have, what capital, aggregate capital, what stock of human labor, population, all of that. Those are kind of the givens, right? And so on top of those endowments, we have to add what is the institutional sort of endowment of the economy and take that as given. So we can't just play around with that. As we can't just reform the courts overnight. So we just take that as given. So either you have a world with imperfect courts or you don't.
I suppose
So then policy is relevant to that endowment, right?
That is true.
changing taxes is simpler than changing institutions, I suppose, to put it bluntly. Ram, I'd like to wait for the young scholars. Okay, if we have two or three.
So
One go, okay, one over here.
Hi sir, my name is Aditya Bakshi. I have a question with respect to the credit side story and something that we learned about yesterday. So a lot of difference in the growth rates before and after the 2008 crisis was due to the hit it took to the credit side of things, right? My question was with respect to the scope shocks like these could have, what sort of impact could shocks like these could have on the model and how can it be inculcated in the same?
We'll take another one before speaker responds. Anyone else?
so
Yeah.
thank you, Professor, for this insightful lecture. I just wanted to ask that if instead of, this is with respect to your first explanation, if instead of a positive elasticity, we assumed a negative one, so that the more productive firms face lower taxes, would this necessarily improve aggregative efficiency? And this would, of course, have implications for entry distortions for the smaller firms. And if yes, then is there any way that we could correct the said distortions?
Yes. So, okay. So, about sort of the effect of shocks to the credit markets, credit systems, as in the 2007 crisis and so on. Yes, absolutely. But there's already a big macro literature which has done that. Okay. So I just refer you to, shocks as well as, that's sort of standard macro fare these days. And especially after the 2007 crisis, there were a lot of macro papers that were looking at that. But typically the macro guys are just interested in explaining fluctuations in per capita output associated with these shocks to the financial system. But they're not looking at sort of policy issues related to that. And so that's what I'm trying to raise, this sort of totally different question, which is about the extent of misallocation and its welfare effect. Yeah, and so the distortions could go the other way, and if you tax more productive firms less, that also would generate misallocation, right? Of a completely different kind. I haven't thought enough about those situations. I don't know if anybody else has, but I think that's an interesting thing to explore. I don't know if, I guess that might be examples you could think of. Maybe firms that are very well connected, are, because somebody is a uncle of the prime minister, okay, that firm manages to evade taxes and so on. So those things do happen, and they also generate misallocation. Even though that entrepreneur maybe Elon Musk, but Elon Musk is getting all kinds of special favors because of his political connections. And so that would also generate misallocation of a different kind. Yeah, so absolutely.
And so I just wanted to ask if there is a way to perhaps correct the distortions that this would imply for the small and medium-sized firms, because due to their small size, they would have in effect lower productivity, which would make them face higher taxes. So,
well, the small firms would disappear because they're getting taxed, so nobody would want to enter. The less able entrepreneurs, if they enter, they'll enter with a smaller firm because they have lower ability. But now, since small firms are taxed more, they will not want to enter. So you'll actually get a shrinkage in the SME sector. So the firms that will be entering will not be so small anymore, right? But then there aren't enough of them. And if that were the case, the problem is also that there aren't enough SMEs. And the correction there that would be needed would be to move the tax system in the opposite direction and provide more subsidies or lower the taxes on the small firms and the opposite for the large firms. Yeah, absolutely. So in that case, the welfare implications would be the same. Is that what you're trying to say between the credit story and the tax story? Yes, okay. I understand. Okay.
We are running out of time, but I see one more question here. I'll have to ask faculty members to reserve their questions over lunch, perhaps.
My paper, I am checking the causal effect of political alignment of agriculture credit. So what I found that is very interesting. So just I added. I wanted to add it. So at aggregate level, there is no impact of political alignment, but there is large reallocations across institutions as a special reallocation. So political alignment, if they are like reallocating the credit to the urban to rural, even within the institutional, there is a larger public, due to the regulation, public sector bank in the rural area, they are not increasing the agriculture credit, but in the semi-urban area they are increasing the agriculture credit, and in the rural area RRBs is actually increasing the agriculture credit, and in the in the metropolitan cities there is some indirect agriculture credit that is actually given to the agro industry. So they are diverting the agriculture credit to the rural and semi-urban area, and there is some increasing of MSME credit in the metropolitan city. I think that is also a danger, more complicated misallocation of credit. Just I wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of research. I think my colleague Ray Fisman and a lot of his students from China have been working on political connections in China and its effects. And so you're absolutely right. Political connections can affect misallocation. The key question from a misallocation perspective, are the more politically connected people, are they suffering the bigger wedges, right? And so if the more able are the ones that are suffering the bigger wedges, then it's fine if political connections operate, because that's going to favor the ones that actually need more support, so to speak. So political alignment can go either way, depending on how political alignment is correlated with ability, or more precisely with the wedge. So there again, it will matter what the source of the wedge is. Is the source of the wedge ability, or is the source of the wedge wealth? And so I think the kind of research you are doing and others doing are extremely useful and important. And so coming back to the political economy issue that was raised by the first student, I think the interaction of political economy and misallocation is a very rich area.
All right, we are out of time, and the chair has to be sensitive to the schedule of the workshop, and also the hunger pangs of the audience who are awaiting their lunch. So we'll, Varun, you have some closing remarks?
Thank you, Professor Mookherjee, for such an engaging session. On behalf of the organizing committee of the Young Scholar Seminar, I now invite Professor Bhattacharjea to felicitate our speaker today. I now also request other members of the Young Scholars Committee, Ram, Manish, Deepak, Rohit, Sandeep, to join the dais.
As far as rural India is concerned, Dr. Shaji KV, Chairman of NABARD. So it is my pleasure to welcome sir, who has kindly agreed to deliver the keynote lecture at the Delhi School of Economics Young Scholar Seminar. And before I read out his introduction, and I just got to know that he is also not aware that how much generous and kind he was, his institution was, to Delhi School of Economics. So I'm taking this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to the NABARD for its generous and continued support to Delhi School of Economics in recent years. Dr. Shaji Krishnan has been serving as chairman of NABARD since December 2022. With over 3 decades of distinguished experience across commercial banking, development finance, rural banking, he has emerged as a leading voice on sustainable agriculture, climate finance, and cooperative sector transformation in India and globally. As chairman of NABARD, India's largest development finance institution for agriculture and rural development, he is spearheading initiatives that integrate climate resilience, sustainability, and food systems financing into the national development agenda. He has guided NABARD's growing focus on climate smart agriculture, small businesses, renewable energy in rural areas, and financial innovation for inclusive food system. Earlier, as Deputy Manager of NABARD, Deputy Managing Director of NABARD, he was instrumental in creating the institution's climate and sustainability vertical, developing its fintech engagement strategy. Dr. Krishnan brings over a decade of governance experience, currently serving as on the board of Deposit Insurance Credit Guarantee Corporation, DICGC, the Open Network for Digital Commerce, and the National Cooperative Development Corporation. He chairs NAPCons and NAB Ventures, which promotes climate-aligned consulting and venture capital for agri-food innovation. He also chairs the Bankers Institute of Rural Development, a key knowledge and capacity building institution, and is part of the governing bodies of EDII. He has demonstrated international leadership as chairman of the Asia Pacific Rural and Agricultural Credit Association, and has also led several expert committees appointed by the Government of India focused on climate cooperative reforms and structural rural finance. Academically, Dr. Krishnan holds a PhD in finance from Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode, MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, and a postgraduate degree in agriculture. He was also a ICAR Junior Fellow and has contributed scholarly writings to agriculture, rural development, and risk management. So we welcome you, sir, and we sincerely thank you for agreeing to come here to deliver the keynote lecture. We are also very fortunate to have Sri TCA Ranganathan, who agreed to chair this event. TCA Ranganathan, a career banker for over 4 decades, currently serves as an arbitrator and independent director, in addition to writing a monthly column on economic issues for Deccan Herald. He has co-authored a Westland publication, that is All the Wrong Turns, offering perspective on the Indian economy. He started his career with State Bank of India in 1975 and held diverse assignments within the bank, including membership of the Technological Planning Group formed by the bank at the turn of the century to identify and induct new technology required to modernize the bank. He has also headed the North Indian Corporation of SBI Capital Markets and Bank's investment banking arms. He set up and led India Shanghai, the first Indian bank in China. He later became the head of SBI's overseas branches. He was MD of State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur prior to his appointment as CMD of Export-Import Bank of India in 2010. As CMD of EXIM Bank, he had been a member of several Government of India overseas initiatives such as Indo-South Africa CEO Forum and the Indo-African Business Council and the Indo-Myanmar Joint Trade and Investment Forums. He was also on the board of Emerging Markets Advisory Council of the International Institute of Finance, Washington, USA, and other Indian financial institutions such as ECGC, Agricultural Finance Corporation, and on the Management Executive Councils of the CII, FICCI, ASSOCHAM, etc. During 2017-2020, he was appointed non-executive chairman of Indian Overseas Bank as part of the government's effort to revive the bank's health. So with these words, I now welcome Dr. Shaji and Sri Ranganathan sir to come to this stage. And over to you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Can I start, please? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be back in D School. I was a student here, 73, 75, did MA Economics from here. So it's always a pleasure to come back. And it's extremely delightful to be here when Dr. Shaji is going to be talking, because he's got a very interesting career background that was read out to you, but he is one of the few bankers who started off as he studied agriculture in college. He joined the bank as an agricultural officer. From there, he went and did his MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. And then he did his PhD in finance as a banker. And he did 30 odd years as commercial banker, and then he went on to a development financial institution. And NABARD is the apex financial institution for DFI for development of rural India, for agricultural development, everything. So it'll be very interesting to hear from him. And the topic which he has selected, rural India and MSMEs. Now, if you look at rural India today, the challenges it faces are intriguing. You know, there is what is so-called the information explosion, which has been happening, and the unification of information quality across age groups, across geographies. So a person in the furthermost part of India, it may not have access to a variety of public goods, but they all know what is happening in Delhi or Bombay, and they have the same needs and the same expectations and same life requirements. Then we've been having a rapid population growth with insufficient urbanization. People have been talking about it, and in Delhi we have been suffering from it. We have these pollution problems, 350, 364. Why is that happening? Because people are crowding into Delhi because number of good cities and good towns are not coming up all over the place. Our urbanization index is only 35 or 36 or 38 or something like that. Globally, peer groups all have 55, 60, 65. So the imbalance is there. So because of these factors, even though agriculture itself has been doing very well compared to what it was earlier, but for last 30 odd years, it's been showing a sustained growth. Now we are the largest producer of milk globally. We are the second largest producer of rice and wheat. In fact, all the food grains, we are the second largest in the world. We are the second largest on horticulture. Horticulture has overtaken food production. It's now about 350 million odd tons. And food production is 330 odd million tons. It's been a remarkable growth. And the growth rate of agriculture production also has been faster than the population growth. So the per capita production has been growing. Despite that, because of the two factors I've talked about, there is increasing feeling of distress in the rural sector, manifested in form of farmer suicides, in form of uncontrolled migration to the metros. In Delhi, for example, almost every day a train which comes from any of UP or Bihar comes with youngsters coming in wanting to go to Delhi. And they are swamping the place. And there are a number of colonies where they all congregate, entire families have shifted because there are no jobs there. And job is not what is defined as a job by the planning commission or by the official, NS, Job is what the youngster wants. It is, if it is not something which is aspirationally equal to what his expectations are, it is not a job for him. You understand what the problem is? You have a certain need, and that aspirational need is not being fulfilled there. So this rural India is caught in that trap. And the solution which academics and all are saying, they should have agriculture-based employment creation, and the only way is that manufacturing in rural India is MSMEs. So that is the context in which Dr. Shaji will be talking. And given that he has been an agriculturist and done his PhD, so he's combined two hats into the same place. It'll be very interesting to listen to him. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I think I can use this one. Okay, sir. Okay. This one. So good afternoon. Thank you, Ranganathan ji. I have heard about you, but then the first time we are meeting. And of course, I have heard about Delhi School of Economics as a premier institute, and it is my privilege to be here talking to the young scholars. In fact, I always try to be in touch with academicians because as banker, I was a practitioner, and I always have to have an urge to go back to academics so that whatever I do as in practice will have a proper framework of some theory. Unless we know the theory behind what we do, we may err. And here mentions were there regarding India being one of the largest agri producers, and also the need for jobs. In fact, the answer to job creation to large extent is lying on the production, the agro production which we have. The commodities is what we are dealing with, and the agro commodities which we tell we are largest producers of milk, we are second largest of many of the agri crops, and we have a large arable area which is suitable for any type of crops in the world, any type of plants, because we have the agroclimatic situations, varied agroclimatic situations, from temperate till the tropics. So any type of plant will fit into the scheme of things as far as agriculture is concerned. So India is blessed with those, but then India is also blessed with a huge population. So we say that we are the largest producers, means we are the largest highly populous country in the world also. We recently surpassed China. So that means we need to produce enough and more to feed our millions first, and then we'll think about exports. And when we think about exports, then the manufacturing and processing, MSME, all these things will come into picture. So what I will try to do is that give some whatever we are doing in NABARD, and also based on my experience, I have stitched together a presentation. I don't know whether it will be fitting into what your expectations are, but then I will deliver what I have come prepared. And I understand that preceding this, there was a lecture on informal sector, and India is having a fairly large informal sector, and how to formalize that. The MSME is one of the answers for that. So I'll try to do that. So now Indian GDP, you all know, India aspires to become a developed country by 2047. That means an 8x growth from the current Indian GDP. That's which is needed. From the current GDP of around 4 trillion, we need to grow to 35 trillion. And per capita income also should grow. Of course, when GDP grows, the per capita income also will grow, provided population we are controlling. So per capita income we intend to increase by 7x. But for this, we need a lot of investments. That investments primarily will come from household savings, but then that may not be sufficient. Right now, there is huge gap in what we need for growth, and we need to actually bring in more money, either through foreign capital, or another solution could be print money, but which many of the economists may not agree. But to some extent, we may have to do that. China would have done that. We all don't know how they developed their economy in the last 3 decades. So here, the Indian manufacturing sector, though rudimentary, is predominated by micro enterprises. Micro enterprises are by definition initially informal, which our government of India is trying to make it more formalized through various measures, which I will be dealing with little later. So right now, the 30%, the contribution is little lesser in terms of micro enterprises into the GDP. But almost 30% of the workforce is there in the micro enterprise sector. As we grow, it has to be a job-led growth rather than investment-led growth. Of course, otherwise there will be concentration of wealth. So ideally, 70% of the whole of the employment should come from manufacturing or MSME sector. But here the structural problem is that dominance of micro enterprises, that means very small enterprises which may not be able to scale up, which partially answers why our exports are not growing. And productivity, of course, is lesser because mostly it will be household enterprises which are there and highly informal. So what we need to do is that as we grow to 2047, MSME GDP should grow at least by 13x to about 15 trillion. And there need to be enough jobs. So it's given that without MSME, even if we grow to become a 30 trillion economy, there will be problems of job creation. So once we talk about that, the need for MSME sector, the scale which right now we have is that numerous MSMEs are there, 6.9 crore MSMEs, of which 6.86 crore are micro. That means predominance of micro enterprise, which I told. The small, which is slightly bigger one, are only 4.8 lakhs, and hardly 36,000 medium enterprises. Large enterprises, of course, we will that is in the formal sector. But the 6.86 crore micro, that is the problem. We have to actually make them small and then medium if we want to have a job-led growth. So productivity and informality I have already told. So that formalization is what we need to do. So here, once we tell about micro MSME, rural MSME is the one important thing, because almost 45% of Indian population is still rural, and there is disguised employment in agriculture. If you ask in the census or any surveys, what are you doing? Many of them report them as agriculturists. They are doing something in agriculture. But then we don't need, given the type of production which we have, we don't need this many people to work in agriculture. We can actually wean away at least 70% of the existing people in agriculture to other sectors, manufacturing. And so far, we were successful in weaning away to service sector. That explains a lot of migrations which are happening from the rural areas to the urban areas. Mostly they are engaged in services sector, because Indian economy right now is a services-led growth, which is not a sustainable way of growing. For a stopgap arrangement, the service-led growth is okay. But if you want to sustain this level of growth of at least 8%, so if you want to grow to a middle income or a developed country by 2047, we have to sustain 8% growth at least for 2 decades, the remaining 2 decades which we have. So that 8% growth compounded will take you to 35 trillion USD. But then by that time, world would have moved ahead. But then still, our per capita income, if we ensure that proper jobs are also given, and more equitable distribution of wealth will be there, where Gini coefficient will be more favorable. So here, the problems are laid out. Whatever the structure which I have shown here will give you solution also, what way we should move. So there are linkages of MSME with agriculture, which is very much needed, because we all know the agro products will give you enough raw material for processing and such other things. Otherwise, most of the agro products are eaten raw and value chains are not properly there. So there is a need for farmers, the existing people who are engaged in agriculture, to be pushed out of the pure production agriculture to processing agriculture and such other means, which is essentially the MSME. And the agriculture per se, for given amount of labor involved, I think the per capita production need to increase. Otherwise, the agriculture also will suffer. There was a mention that agriculture growth was sufficiently enough to take care of our needs. The 3.5% which we used to tell, the average growth of agriculture, and even during COVID, the agriculture sector was one of the best performing sector. But then it was stable and steady. But that level of growth and the kind of people involved in that activity, I think the rate of growth should be either higher or people should be taken away. So here, as we go towards Vikasit Bharat, there should be some structural changes which need to happen. Roughly around 46% of the workforce which are right now engaged in agriculture need to be taken away, and then at least 15 crore additional MSME jobs need to be created. That means the average of around 60 to 75 lakh new jobs annually. So in agriculture, as I said earlier, large unemployment and disguised employment is there, where we need to shift that. So that is why here we are seeing a lot of concentration of people towards certain cities and sectors, which we need to now make it little more averaged out, and growth need to now be diffused to rural areas. The fruits of growth need to be there in the rural areas. Unless we do that, then there will be serious issues of social strife also, because people may not be taking part meaningfully in economic activities. That means their average income is not growing. The so-called the faster economic growth which countries now witnessing. So country will grow because we are almost on an autopilot. We will grow, but then that growth will be concentrated on certain sectors, and even the wealth also will accumulate to certain sectors of certain sections of society only. So the conclusion is very clear that MSMEs are not just part of the employment solution, they are the primary labor absorbing engine of Indian structural transformation. Actually, the Vikasit Bharat is a structural transformation also, where it should be manufacturing led rather than services led. So far, services led is okay, but then right now it is a time that the MSME sector or the job led growth should take over. World over, if you see, ideally around 35 to 50% of the economy is from the manufacturing or MSME sector. And most of the employment, as I said earlier, 70% of the employment is coming from this sector. So this transformation need to be fast tracked, and that is where the government of India is also being conscious of that. They are taking a lot of efforts. So that is one. So here, as we transfer the people from agriculture to manufacturing sector, then a lot of skills need to be given. We can't just say that you have to set up, we have to give some money and then you set up. No, the soft part of that is that skill development. We have to reskill the people, and the literacy level in terms of their primary literacy and also financial literacy need to be growing. So there, the primary activities where the higher end of value chains in agriculture, the agro processing, the food value chains, dairy, fisheries. Dairy, we have tasted marginal success. Of course, some certain states like Gujarat, the different model of growth was there, where cooperatives have led, and there essentially cooperatives are MSMEs, because they are doing a lot of processing activities, and they are essentially MSMEs. If you see even the developed economy like the US or Germany, the share of cooperatives in the GDP is very high. Even in the financial sector, if you see, it is surprisingly so, because the capitalist economy like the US, if you see the share of cooperative banks in the financial sector, it will be upwards of 25%. In Germany, it is around 30-35%. But in India, if you see, it's hardly 8 to 9%. So that itself shows that the way in which we grew was little skewed. And the cooperatives, the important part is that many of the people in India may not believe in cooperatives, because historically, if you see that cooperatives came into being as a response to crisis. When the Bengal famine happened, so people came together because there was no government to help them. So people came together and organized a manner and formed cooperatives and tried to save themselves, which was later formalized through 1905 Cooperative Societies Act, and then the cooperative movement predates the Indian independence as well. So here, here this people coming together, helping themselves in different form, either informally or formally. Earlier, we all would have heard about self-help group movement, which is an informal gathering of people, some 10 to 20 people coming together trying to help themselves. But then if you formalize it, then it can be either a partnership, or if more than 10 or 20 people are coming together, then it's a company or a cooperative. And cooperative is, it's a member driven, so they will distribute wealth also. Whereas in the private entities, it is the shareholder who will be a dominant shareholder, will be taking the or extracting the wealth out of, or welfare out of that area. Whereas cooperatives will recycle that wealth within that area. So the MSMEs and cooperatives should go hand in hand if we want to distribute wealth as we generate enough production as we go to a developed economy. So here we need to have some conditions like affordable credit need to be there, which government is trying through various means. You would have heard about a lot of government schemes like Agri Infrastructure Fund, and then there's some credit guarantees given. PM Vishwakarma schemes, a lot of schemes are there, which I will also allude to a little later. Cluster-based industrialization, a lot of clusters, MSME clusters have been identified. And then there are digital market access, because the cost of selling will be brought down heavily through digital means. That is where the ONDC, the Open Network of Digital Commerce, there was a mention about that. I sit in the board of ONDC, and NABARD is one of the first investors in ONDC. So it was an unlikely investor, because then what we told is that, yes, for the cooperatives or for the farmers or the farmer producer organizations, or digital means of selling will reduce their cost of operations. And in that context, we also should force the initiatives of the government towards that direction. That is where NABARD came into being in the ONDC. And then, as I said earlier, women-led enterprises, the SHG group, bank linkage program, the self-help groups are essentially women-led. But the 50% of the population, if they are not taking part in economic activity, that means we are losing the opportunity cost of that as well, because they are there, but they are not taking part of an economic activity. That means their production capacity, the potential which is there, is not getting realized through the GDP growth. So there, as I said earlier, a lot of skills need to be there, and we need to identify that with the 47% population which is in rural MSMEs will create enough jobs as we grow, and it will be, and such a growth will be more inclusive as well. So here I have alluded to the value chain developments. So current situation is that farmers sell mostly raw and they realize lesser value because of that, and whatever value is getting added to their produce is getting cornered by the middleman, that is the trader or the processor, who is a private enterprise. And more people now in production agriculture means their per capita availability of money also is coming down. So essentially the value addition which is happening out of the primary produce they are having is going outside the rural areas. That means welfare is not there in rural areas, and they are getting pushed to urban areas, and that is where when welfare there and progress is there in urban areas, migration also happens, and as a consequence there will be some vicious circle coming in, that which Delhi is now witnessing, that a huge population in small areas, and then a lot of the infrastructure problems are there. So here we need to push the farmer, the primary producer, from the price taker to value creator, so that he captures the value of, or the larger share of the consumer price to himself. Otherwise, so for 100 rupee of money which a consumer pays for any particular product, he may get around 20 rupees. And remaining 80 rupees is cornered by the middleman, which may add value, or maybe a supply chain actor who doesn't add value also may corner. Normally traders in any economy, traders are those who are taking the cream out of this. So traders have the capacity to hold these products as well, and then sell at their will. So they are actually the price taker. But then ideally the farmer should become the price. For that, MSME is the solution, where processing should be happening at the near farm gate level, and there should be some sort of a branding. You might have heard about localized brandings. Now there are niche products which, if it is branded properly and with assured quality, there are a lot of people who are the takers. Even the people who are in the developed West also would look to their social impact of their spending. So there, if we can sell a product with a story of sustainability or proper branding, I think they are ready to pay a little higher, and that means if locally produced and locally processed agro product will bring in more money to the local areas. And then as the farmers, because here the fragmentation of land, India is having the problem of too many people with lesser land. That means fragmentation is there. So on an industry scale, agriculture can't be done. So the other solution is that we have to aggregate the people in terms of geographies as producer organizations, and then they will have the market power. So here through SMEs we should try to empower rural India to capture the value locally, rather than the value getting captured by a person who is sitting away from the rural areas and taking all the lion's share of the consumer price. So for all this to happen, the finance is one thing which is very important. So where without money, even if they have a margin or a capital, their capital, it has to be augmented with loans, with credit. So there is huge access gap in the MSME sector because of mostly the information asymmetry. So a banker will give loan to a person they know better. So it is in the interest of the MSME customer to disclose most of the things. The informal asymmetry between a banker and the customer or the MSME player should be bridged as much as possible, and some sort of that information asymmetry can be solved with some collateral, because even if that information is not available, then collateral may stand in case the loan is going bad. And then here the problem is that informality is too high. So there is no proper records, proper registrations are not there, And then, of course, the financial history, you all heard about the need for the proper financial history in terms of CIBIL and such other things, or as in terms of tax payment. Tax payment is out of question because these are all small players, but at least their transactions which are doing, if they are captured in a proper way, which can be presented to a banker, that means the information asymmetry is bridged to a lot. So then he also needs a patient capital in terms of longer term finance, maybe in equity also. Because normally banks are comfortable in lending short term because they can recover it and recycle it faster. But then MSMEs require longer term capital, and then risk sharing. Well, that's an important thing. If there is an information asymmetry, then there should be some sort of a credit enhancement to be coming in, and that credit enhancement can happen through guarantee. And guarantee, of course, somebody has to guarantee his loan. Either a person with a higher net worth need to guarantee, or the sovereign, the government of India, need to do that. There, the blended finance and guarantees will come. Then the equity, the venture capitals, so person or an institution which is ready to take higher risk, they can go for the equity support, and risk support need to be there. So here, we need to push these people with adequate credit to have a proper capital structuring need to be there. Otherwise what will happen is that the poor fellow alone will take all the risk to himself, and with having lesser knowledge about all these activities, the chances of failure are higher, and that is what is happening in the initial stages of what we are doing. So now what we in NABARD is doing, that is also very it's timely to understand now. So here the credit access gap we are trying to bridge through refinance, where the resource poor banks, which are necessarily rural financial institutions. By rural financial institutions, we mean regional rural banks and cooperative banks, and also maybe some NBFCs. So these, essentially in rural areas, the deposits will be lesser because banks are actually recycling money. They take deposits and give loans from these deposits. But then, in rural areas, essentially, if you see the credit deposit ratio, which is the barometer of the banking business over there, essentially in rural areas, it will be upwards of 80, maybe even more than 100. That means deposits are deficient there. So here we need to support these rural financial institutions, and then also aggregate the people to have a better confidence. That is where the SHG bank linkage came in. So NABARD pioneered that, and then we went little further in aggregating the producers as producer organizations, either as farmer producer organizations or as micro enterprises producer organizations, other than farm producer organizations also we added. And then in the patient capital gap, we are giving longer term finance. We are also creating infrastructure through Rural Infrastructure Development Fund, the RIDF, which is mentioned over there. And we have also set up subsidiaries where banks are reluctant to lend. Then our subsidiaries will lead the way because we understand rural areas better. So we will structure their credit products better than a one-size-fits-all approach of many of the commercial banks. And that is where our subsidiaries coming being. And we also, on behalf of Government of India, we have a subsidiary offering credit guarantee to certain operations. And we have a venture capital arm for equity investments. And we also have blended with where grants, returnable grants, and such other type of financing products are there. So here, what we are trying is that we are trying to build, unlike a commercial bank which is into pure lending, we are trying to build support as a uniform capital ecosystem for rural enterprises. So that way, we have set up initially close to around 5,000 of farmer producer organizations, which later Government of India declared it as 10,000 new farmer producer organizations. You would have heard about that. 10,000 farm producer organizations, which was necessarily intended to aggregate the farmers so that they can fight on economies of scale rather than individually fighting as a fragmented landholder. So here, there is a convergence required of the farm producer organization, which I have thought about, and then the MSME. Whatever an FPO which is doing are essentially micro and small enterprises activity. Either they are giving aggregating produce and processing it, or as an input supplier. Trading is also an MSME activity, for your information. So aggregation and input supply, where this under the new Government of India scheme also 10,000 farmer producer organizations are made. And then now we are trying to transform these FPOs as rural MSMEs with processing assistance. There is an agri-infra fund available for the FPOs where there are interest subventions and credit guarantee available from the Government of India. So that now all these activities will help the farmer retain whatever surpluses he is generating, then higher share of the consumer price, as I said earlier, and then increasing their bargaining power and scale. So here, once they come together as farm producer organizations, there is a guarantee available from Government of India. So there is no need for a collateral to be given. So that means in the information asymmetry we talked about is bridged to a large extent. So banks will be comfortable against the guarantee which is given by the sovereign to give loans to them. And then even insurance is also there, various insurance products are also there. So here NABARD is also getting involved in these activities, helping government to make the FPOs as rural MSMEs. When we talk about all these things, technology is very much important because technology reduces the cost of operations, and Government of India has taken a lot of initiatives on these, on making the digital public infrastructure available. First of all, the India stack, which we are telling about, that reduced the KYC, that is know your customer requirements, and otherwise banks would have to spend a lot in knowing the customer properly. So this Aadhaar enabled systems have reduced the cost of acquisition of customer. That means through the DPI, the digital public infrastructure which they have built, the persons can be identified faster, but that alone is not sufficient. So we have to now link that person with the activity which they are doing. That means formalization of those activities need to be there, and then on which area he is doing, that also need to be. If you talk about agriculture, if a person is identified as a customer of a bank, but then the activity of agriculture is proven either by the land holding which he have and the crop he is growing. So some sort of a digital mechanism need to be there so that the banks will have more confidence to lend. The information asymmetry which I was talking about can be bridged to a large extent. So here the unified payment interface has created a lot of digital trail of their activities, so that their transactions could be captured, so that banks will be getting a better knowledge about the customer. The open network of digital commerce, which I told, that will help in digital marketing. The GST, the unified goods and services tax, simplified a lot of tax reforms. And the e-commerce, which may not only on ONDC, now even if you go to Amazon also, farmer producer organizations are now selling. So here the opportunities which are getting unlocked is that market access is getting there beyond local mandis. Earlier farmers were forced to sell in the local mandis alone because of various acts, a lot of restrictions happening. Now for a horticulture farmer, he is free to sell wherever he wants, and digital payments and credit scoring go hand in hand. And then the e-market participation also will create a digital trail. And for exports, the most important thing is that traceability need to be there, so that the residues, the impact, the labor, the child labor usage, all these things should be properly documented. So traceability is very important for exports, and all these digital enablers will help the farmer in pushing his activity into higher ends of the value chain. But then all these things, when technology alone may not be the solution, we need capacity. For using the technology, the poor illiterate farmer or partially illiterate farmer need to be handheld properly. The capacity building, his skills for managing an enterprise need to be developed. And then within an organization, be it in a farmer producer organization or a cooperative or a private enterprise, the governance aspects, a lot of compliances and such other things are there required. So that is essentially the developmental aspect of financing, which NABARD like institutions, EXIM Bank was doing that, and even SIDB is doing, and NABARD is also doing. So these are development financial institutions, not purely in the commercial space, but then making people equipped to access commercial bank financing. That is the function of development finance. So we are, along with technology, we are also trying to develop capabilities, and without that, the inequality will be higher. So now, most important thing which is there in the agriculture sector is that one is that the political risk which is already materialized in agriculture sector, which is now showing as demands for waivers and such other things. So far, the banks or any commercial entity will be reluctant to touch because of this risk. And then the climate risk. If you see that the agricultural insurance is very costly nowadays, because because it is not expanded to cover the larger share of farmers, because farmers are reluctant because they feel that everything has to be given free. But then there should be market-based solutions, and the reasons which are beyond the control of a farmer. He can do best cultivations, he can select the best seed, the cultural operations which he undertake in the farm can be the best one. But beyond that, there are vagaries of weather, there are other incidences are there. This which are beyond their control need to be ensured. That insurance, that is one area where the climate risk factors are coming in. Climate risk is one real. We know. I need not mention about that. Every day we are facing that. Even the gross cropped area in the country is coming down because of climate incidents. And then there will be one year of excess rainfalls, the other year of drought. So we need to now promote climate smart agriculture. So when my CV was getting read out, a lot of instances where climate is coming in. Agriculture sector is one area where the farmer may not realize that climate risk has materialized, but then we have to make him realize, or subtly we have to incorporate the practices which are climate smart in his activity. Otherwise, sustainability of his income will be at doubt. And India is one country where we have not taxed the farmers, or the compliances of climate related activities are not given to the farmer, because farmer right now are struggling for foot to mouth existence, and if you are taxing him in between because of compliances requires and all, then it will be too much for him. So we have to now protect his income and then help him sustain that income. That is where the government entities like NABARD are coming in. And then in rural areas there are huge right now technology also is now at a mature phase where we can adopt renewable energy concepts, including solar and wind energy, which needs huge investments, upfront investments, which a development financial institution like NABARD can do. And then the water efficient operations, because rice is one thing which is a water guzzling crop. You know that when we export rice, we are not only exporting the grain, we are exporting water also. You know the groundwater table in Punjab and Haryana are getting depleted day by day, and because of other subsidies involved and all, incentives like procurements and all there. So farmers are not diversifying into other crops which are more actually value creating than rice, because MSPs are operational in these areas, because farmers will tend to cultivate those cereals which are under rice and wheat, which are water guzzling crops, which in fact is not sustainable. Monoculture. Of course, green revolution was needed at that point of time where we didn't produce enough food. Now we are at a situation where there is food security is there and we are producing excess of what we need. But now we need to diversify into millets, water resistant crops, climate resilient crops, horticulture crops and all. We are, as NABARD, we are working with many of the farmer producer organizations in Punjab and Haryana especially. Certainly we are changing their knowledge about these activities and then diversifying into vegetables, cash crops, field crops like that. And again, the post-harvest losses is one important thing. We produce enough, but then whatever we produce, at least 40% of that is not reaching the consumer table because a lot of leakages. That is that is actually criminal waste. So we need to have processing infrastructure, and that is where the Government of India's Agri Infrastructure Fund scheme was exactly aimed at that. So here, whatever activities we do in this, we certainly move in making it climate resilient, because farmer will not realize at this point of time what to do. But then in this normal days of operations, we are now incorporating climate resilient and climate sustainable activities. So that is a survival strategy for the farmers. I alluded to the women. Women are not necessarily producers, because they don't own land, but then they are now engaged in a lot of activities of processing. So now self-help group, which is at least at a 5th or 6th year of cycle is there. Now this is the right time for us to graduate these groups, which are consumption-led groups, into enterprises, micro enterprises, and then to small and medium enterprises. Right now we are working with Government of India in that count, that graduating women in the self-help group as micro entrepreneurs, as maybe groups of entrepreneurs, maybe 5 of them coming together as a joint liability group or as a registered entity. So here the women collectives are getting scaled up as micro enterprises, which will improve actually. When a woman is entering into an economic activity, it will be improving the nutrition of the family, the education, of course, the value she creates will remain with the family. Overall household welfare will improve. So here what we see is that the future of rural micro enterprises or rural MSMEs should be necessarily women-led. So for all these, we are alluding to that now in making, I think one session was there on informal sector. We are now, Government of India is consciously trying to push that informal sector to formal sector through various means, formalizing that. Udyam registration is one thing where a simple registration without any tax implications, they need not pay tax, they need not have PAN or something like that, they need to just register so that their activity will be getting captured. So around 7.3 crore, because it's a crowdsourcing of activity without any compliance requirements, making it easy for them to get formalized. Then we have the Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program, where a lot of enterprises are getting started. Then the credit guarantee, I have told about the sovereign guarantee which is given. For any MSME activity, right now there is a sovereign guarantee available. So, that means the loan is assured. You are the entrepreneur need to set up his business in a proper form. That's all. His obligation is to set up as per the project cost which a bank has approved. For that, government is standing as a guarantee. We have a sustainability fund also available. SME growth fund is available. PM Vishwakarma for the artisans, and in the procurement also, Government of India consciously told that there should be 25% mandatory procurement, so that an assured selling is there, and there is a ready-made customer available. So many of the public enterprises are, and also private entities are asked to procure at least 25% of their requirement from SMEs. Which in turn, and then there will be a priority of payment also. Whenever a payment comes in, there is a priority of payment to MSMEs. Otherwise, it is actually punishable if they are not paying within time to an SME enterprise. That is, so there is a strong commitment from the government or the state is available. But then we need to converge all these things. That is the problem with where a lot of policies, lot of programs are there at the field level, at the implementation stage level. We need to converge that. So in that, we are also in the process of studying what is happening in the rural area, where it fails. So whenever schemes are made in either our internal programs or programs of the government, we do a lot of assessments and give feedbacks. So what we have found is that subsidies are increasing. For subsidies actually are supporting. Research and development also, this no-brainer. Investment scale also is going up. Interest payments and negative impact on gross value addition also we have noticed. And in our unorganized sector, in rural, credit is actually being pushed because of the various measures. As a result, investments are also using. And then the digital means, the internet usage, if you see that there is no digital divide within India, like a rural-urban divide is there, but fortunately there is no digital divide which is there. That is the reason why we actually graduated from the fixed telephony to mobile telephony very fast. Fixed telephony we didn't have universal coverage, but we graduated to universal mobile telephony very fast because of the cheap data which we gave. So now here the grounds are very clear that cost of credit is lowered because of the guarantees available, because of the subsidized funds available. Then that will in turn lead to more capital investments either in a distributed manner or in a collective manner. And with the digital adoption which is there in terms of lowering the cost of operations, we are seeing an accelerated rural productivity which is now manifested as improved GDP growth in rural areas. So there are evidences, and we are now, as NABARD also, as the nature of the rural areas changed from agriculture to agro-processing to MSME, in our NABARD's basic functions also, these functions got added. Parliament enacted in 2018 to add MSME, because there is already an MSME development entity should be available, but government felt that NABARD being in the rural areas more, MSME activity also should be a mandate of NABARD. So government facilitated that, and as a result, we have internally also have a rural MSME policy with credit facilitation. Skilling is identified because no commercial entity will venture into skilling, which a development financial entity only can do. And we also aggregate these activities as cluster development activities. For the venture capital, for the startups, we gave support. Climate resilience also being a public good, a development financial entity only can do that. So that is where we are focusing on those areas so that we can reduce the dependency of these people on the government. And we have to now wean away such entrepreneurs from the government dependency, subsidies or grant dependencies or direct benefit transfer dependencies to commercial enterprises so that they can stand on their own feet. And in this process, we identify cooperatives as a major cog in the wheel. we are now reviving the cooperatives in the country. We are now running the world's largest digitization program for the cooperatives. As we speak, around 70,000 of the primary cooperatives in the country are now in the digital world. Now we have digitized their operations. Their balance sheets are getting generated. This in turn will improve the governance and then the belief of the formal financial institutions in the cooperatives. That is what, maybe in 1 year down the line, they will become the original producer organizations of the country. We are now positioning cooperatives as producer organizations, not as credit organizations, with higher digital adoption and market linkages. So for the next decade, as we move forward, we have to move forward very fast. There is a demographic dividend which is there to be tapped. Unless we tap that properly with policies, with a job-led growth of our aim, I think we will be missing the bus. We have a window of around 25 to 30 years. If we miss the bus, then we have to wait for another 60 years for the demographic dividend to come in. By that time, I think when India would have... China has done that from 80s. For the last 20 years or 25 years, they were growing upwards of 8%. Japan has done that. South Korea has done that. All these things were manufacturing-led and also partially because of that export-led as well. Whereas in India, whatever growth so far we had are services sector-led and it is not export-led. Our current account deficit and even the trade deficit is increasing. So we need to bridge that. We need to bring in proper capital from outside. For that, manufacturing first should grow. That too through MSMEs, and then exports should grow. And if these two happens, I think the demographic dividend which is there for the country now, the proportion of population which is now in the productive area, they can be properly tapped, harnessed for better growth. And that is where all the policies of the Government of India is coming, especially focused on rural MSME. And MSME is getting more attention now because government also realizes that this is the way to forward. So as young scholars, what we can do? So you also need to contribute to the whole the momentum which is now gaining in the economy. You should first realize that there is a momentum which is happening. That too MSME within that rural, because India is predominantly right now rural. But then government is now trying to set up as a solution to the crowded cities. Government is now trying to disperse this into smart cities and such other things. In the last budget also there were announcement of setting up new cities. So now we need very bold, deeper engagement of academics with practitioners. And for that, we have to reimagine the research also, to orient that research with rigor, originality and scale. With the rural entrepreneurship and the impact measurements also. I think some of you can take up those. A lot of government schemes are there. What is actually happening, if you can capture that, we have to have data, evidence-based policy making. That is where India is lacking, and rural area is data deficient as of now. We are also trying in our own way to make it data rich. We are now setting up a data lake for the rural sector. We are now signed almost 60 MOUs with various entities to aggregate the data which is available in a dispersed manner to be in a very concentrated manner into our data lake, which can be retrieved for many of the evidences for policy making. Otherwise, we may go wrong in arriving at the right policy. And there are clear pathways of credit, productivity, income, that growth, that cycle, the virtuous cycle that is need to be there. We have to push credit, which increase the productivity, and which in turn will increase the income, which again get reinvested. So that for that you need to trace, and there are a lot of research need to be there, and on the institutional designs also. So many of you would have not known that cooperatives can be the solution for the India's problem, but from NABARD side we believe going forward, cooperatives will be. See, right now the GDP contribution of cooperatives in the lower single digits. Any country, even a capitalist country also, the share of cooperatives in the GDP is upwards of 25%. So otherwise, the equity in development can happen. Otherwise, it will the whole of the development will be cornered by certain sections. The cooperatives they actually distribute whatever welfare they created. So that means we need to have a cooperative-led growth, and that exactly the reason why Government of India 2 years back has set up a Department of Cooperation. You would have Ministry of Cooperation. You would have heard. Cooperation is a state subject. So actually states would have driven that. But then Government of India thought that there should be some framework at the national level, and that is where Ministry of Cooperation came in. And we are working closely with the Ministry of Cooperation in driving that policy. So we need a new generation of developmental economists. I think I see some of you also will come as developmental economists, and there is a gold mine to be tapped. It will serve your purpose as well, and also the country's purpose. So I conclude by this slide. For prosperous India, we need to empower rural SMEs. We need to sustain agricultural livelihoods, but for that, MSMEs in agriculture sector need to be there. Even Reserve Bank of India also now defines many of the agro processing as agriculture activity for the credit for loans. So you all know the priority sector obligations of the government of the banks. At 40% of their loans which they are giving should be to priority sector. Within that, 18% should be to agriculture sector. If you see the data, not even 8% of the loans are going to pure agriculture. So the Reserve Bank also has expanded the definition of agriculture to include agro processing also as a policy measure to attract people out of pure production agriculture to processing agriculture, and that is where rural MSMEs will fall in place. We have done reasonably well in financial inclusion. You have heard about PM Jan Dhan accounts. Universal access to accounts are there. We need to make these accounts now active in terms of economic activity, in terms of transactions. For that, we need to create enterprises. These PMJDY account holders should transform into lot of direct benefit transfer is going to them. They can even escrow these direct benefit transfers as capital for their enterprises. If they for that, lot of capacity building, financial literacy need to be imparted on them. And as I said earlier, demographic dividend has to be harnessed now. If we are missing, then India is missing for another 60 to 70 years. We'll miss. So rural MSMEs are core to India's growth story. We can't keep rural MSMEs as a different topic, and Indian growth story can be discussed in terms of higher, in petroleum or infrastructure alone. Rural MSME is the core where equity in the growth will be ensured. If we have flourishing rural MSME, then we'll have a flourishing growth and then equity in growth also can be. So the inclusive growth is very important, where regional balances also, there can't be like some section northeast can't be, or even Western India, Central India. These are all deficient in terms of activities. There, where even if you see the banking activity also, the northeast and Central India are deficient. So we need to have a proper balance available. Employment is very important, job-led growth, and for sustainability, climate risks need to be understood. Inclusiveness in terms of women entrepreneurship, and most importantly, we need to have a resilient rural economy which is self-reliant. The Gram Swaraj which we are talking about. There is a first sentence which is read. Can somebody read that? I think that is fitting into the MSMEs. They may perish. A lot of risks are there. Unless we help them to overcome those risks, I think India as a country can't grow. Thank you. Questions are there? I'm ready to take, otherwise we are on time, right?
So who's going to ask questions? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Prasida from IFT. So government has created the policy in such a way that the MSE wants to remain small or medium, as they can avail more subsidies. So what can we do to build the capability to convert MSMEs to champions and boost the exports?
Yeah, in the initial stages, what you said was correct. But now government also realizes that there need to be a policy push to graduate these micro enterprises to small and medium. First thing they did was that they expanded the definition of small, making it larger in terms of capital investments. And then right now the investment as a criteria is taken out also. The turnover criteria came in, and then they also expanded the guarantee coverages, the subsidies or the policy supports, the government support available also they have expanded. Right now up to 10 crores you can get the guarantee. So that means they can graduate into medium without losing any of the subsidies. So that is there. So government also, initial stages what you said is correct, but right now the government also wants that they have to graduate, and for that banks are also being prodded to give liberal finances. So credit is one thing. There is a target for them also. If they miss that target, then they are being punished in terms of asking them to deposit that whatever shortages are there in a low yielding asset, which is the private sector shortfall funds. So that way banks are getting punished also. So that means there are realizations, and right now the inclination is to push these enterprises from micro to small and then to medium.
Also, one interesting thing has happened, and it's a very encouraging thing, and it's only the last 3-4 years has been happening. The definition of MSME has been revised twice now. That increase in definition, now the amounts which have gone in capital investment which are eligible to be counted as MSMEs now goes up to a respectable figure, running into multiple of tens of crores, about over 200. Earlier it was not so. So that has happened, and that's a progressive thing also.
Thank you, sir.
You can take 2-3 questions in one round. And then
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yes. We'll forget the question.
Yeah, I know. I think one by one might be better.
Short,
So, sir, my question is mainly regarding the agriculture sector's growth. So, when we talk about when we are giving subsidies to the farmers and all, the main issue that a farmer in country at this point is facing is the credit that is taking, and that's the informal credit, and the interest rates are very high, and that actually hinders his productivity in the sense that he cannot grow on his own, and that's why the overall agricultural productivity of the country is not growing. So, like, how do we address that from a government's perspective?
Yeah. See, two issues. Why they are not getting adequate credit? Because they don't have records to prove that they are agriculturists. And in India, absentee landlordism is very huge. They own the land, but they are not the cultivators. And even lease is not legalized. So even if some farmer is cultivating the land, he is not having the record that he has taken on lease. Lease land farming is because of various issues. The owner of the land is hesitant to give some documents proving that he is actually cultivating it. So now that is that activity. If we can have some records, then the information asymmetry I was talking about, that he linking that person to the activity. Some digital means need to be there, and that is where the agri stack, I don't know if you have heard about that. Indian government is now developing a digital public good called as agri stack, which links the person to the activity and the crop he is growing in a digital way. It is not a revenue record, but it is a digital record which is available. And then over and above this, a value chain financing. Some of you will be knowing what is value chain finance. Value chain is that we are actually financing not the one person, but then a chain of activities. And in between that, if we sandwich this lease land farmer, either through the input credit or for the output credit, or whatever he is selling, that is escrowed, and against that financing is given. So then this farmer, the issue of having adequate credit to the farmer, landless farmer. This what you told is because of the landlessness. He is not having the record. That is exactly the issue there. The informal money lending is happening there. Here, banks are now asked. Even the policy measure also, if you see the Kisan credit card up to 2 lakhs, there is no need for a collateral to be given. So policy direction is already there. But there is hesitancy at the field level because of the NPA problems and moral hazard issues. Because a farmer think that once he takes a loan, then government may waive it. This issue is coming during the elections and all. So that moral hazard issue is there. That is a political risk which the agriculture sector is facing. Here, two things. One is that the agri stack going forward will solve the issue of this. Plus, the various value chain financing products which banks are evolving. We did pilots with many other banks, and now we are posing to the government this as an agricultural loan product. Once these things get familiarized, I think the issue will be solved.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, sir. So you mentioned about millets being a sustainable alternative to rice. So what I feel the problem with with millets, or millets in particular, or in general with agri alternatives, is that there may not be simply enough domestic or export demand for those products. So it just doesn't make economic sense for the government to encourage the production or the farmers to produce it. This is my first question, and I have one more question. My another question is that in the morning lecture, we learnt about that these so-called affirmative policies, including subsidies and all, might actually lead to misallocation of resources in the market. Or in general, we can understand that these kind of policies might have distortionary effects as well, right? So how do you plan to deal with these things? Thank you.
First of all, the millet question. Can you ask your grandmother or grandfather what was their staple food? Rice came in 80s, in 60s. Before that, they were actually eating millets, minor millets or major millets and such other things. So it is not the product which we are going to sell. We are trying to sell the story behind that product, the benefits behind that. Actually, millets are more nutritious and sustainable than rice. As a stopgap arrangement, because now if you see that diabetes in India is becoming diabetes capital because of this carbohydrates which we are taking. So wheat and rice are the major culprits. That doesn't mean that we should stop eating rice and wheat, but in measured manner we can take this. So we have to educate this, and also we may have to develop various products, various ways of cooking. There is a way of now. There's a cultural shift which has to happen, which will happen now. People mostly in the urban areas, they have now understood the benefits of eating millets. So gradually that cultural shift is happening. That is one thing. Second question is that subsidies and all are distorting. Yes, even the Kisan credit card, which is for the working capital arrangement, the interest subvention, that is the subsidy on interest which is given by the government, is only for the working capital. So that means that the inclination of the farmer to invest in some capital assets will be lesser because he is getting cheaper credit for working capital. So there is a misallocation happening. We are working with the government. So the government also has realized that as a stopgap arrangement, yes, the interest subvention and such other things are okay. But on a longer manner, that is where the DBT, the Kisan, PM Kisan thing, the farmer is given freedom to utilize that. They are not asking question of for what they are using it. They should own the land. That is the only question which is asked. And after that, they are given 6,000 rupees per quarter, which is given, which is he is free to use it in the way in which he wants, either to acquire a capital asset or making it as a margin for a loan which is given. Anything you can do that. So the government is now addressing the issue of subsidy misallocation, and going forward, a lot of such measures we can expect from the government.
Okay, thank you. For the millets thing, I would like to know something more. Just one more. So what I can get that you want, shouldn't we focus more on the demand side of millets thing, which is lacking right now? We are focusing more on the supply.
Both sides, supply side and demand side, we need to. If we create more demand and if supply is not matching, then that will create problem again. So we have to work on the both counts.
Yes, please. There one question coming from here.
So this question is response to your previous reply on the political economic questions. So there's a lot of friction in the market, in order to get the rural credit. And oftentimes it is not reaching to the real beneficiaries, right? The small farmers are not getting the credit who should get the credit. So how government is working to resolve this political economy problem, and which is really kind of a serious issue these days. And I think yesterday one presenter presented a paper on that.
I'm not having the advantage of seeing that. What was the major argument of that paper?
I think it's all these NBFCs and all giving the rural credit, but oftentimes it is it's more of a political economic question.
Okay. So I'm not a great fan of NBFCs. If you see the ownership structure of NBFCs, most of the private equities are holding this. Private equity sitting in New York has invested in this NBFC, and whatever profit or the welfare which is created out of their activities in Indian rural areas are getting sucked out to the benefit of the capital provider which is there in the New York. So the answer to this question will be from the local institutions rather than other institutions, private institutions. And that is where the cooperative institutions need to be propped up. So here we have a serious issue of information asymmetry, which I am telling. Information asymmetry because the bank is not able to understand the borrower better. If they are able to understand the borrower, because banking is trust, if they understand more, then they will be more comfortable in giving loans. So the solution to this is that a cooperative bank who understands the local customer better. Only thing is that the governance need to be fit there, because there should not be a moral hazard issue that I know a person better, so I'll give more money to him, let him swindle the money. So that issue need to be first ring fenced, and that is where digitization of cooperatives will be playing a larger role. Right now, sitting in Delhi, the Honorable Minister of Corporation can see a remote of the cooperative society, what is their activity. We have already demonstrated to him. And that way, the information asymmetry and the moral hazard problem, which was the bane of these cooperatives, are getting solved. Maybe 1 year after, you will be seeing a lot of policy interventions from Government of India through cooperatives. So once that happens, I think the issue of rural credit, which even this decollateralized. Actually, as per RBI guidelines, banks are not supposed to take collateral up to 3 lakhs. But because of the information asymmetry and the huge NPA problem, and also the political economy, that farmer also may feel that, okay, I need not pay. If an election comes, then there is a promise of waiver happening. That populism, that is killing actually. In the longer term, this is killing the sector, which has to be now, through proper policy measures, we have to take this out, this ill effects of political economy to be taken out.
Yes, please.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your address. Coming from Rajasthan, I have seen many farmers taking the loans for the agriculture, but they use it for their personal use, like paying for marriage functions or other things. So we see this disalignment in the purpose of the loan and the actual uses. And as you mentioned, so other things the state is not focusing on is the education, financial education and agriculture education in the villages. So as you mentioned, the Ministry of Cooperation, so does the ministry also looking after this alignment that the purpose of MSMEs and the farmers' education, they are aligned in a way that they serve each other's purpose?
Yes. Yeah. So first your question was on actually taking the money for some other purposes, production, rather than from production consumption purposes. See, for any loan, any borrower, first he has to satisfy his own needs. So some sort of minor divergences are okay. But then major things happen, major divergence happen, then he'll fall into a debt trap, because he has to produce enough to repay the principal and also the income, interest. Here, we are doing some pilots, because money is fungible. Once you get the money, it can be used for any purpose. Can we make it purpose bound? So that is where the central bank digital currency, you would have heard about that, CBDC. We are doing some pilots where we are purpose binding that digitally using this blockchain technology. So that if earlier in any crop loan there is a cash component and a kind component. So farmer has to necessarily take that kind component in terms of fertilizers, pesticides, so that he can be reasonably assured that he'll make use of that for his production activities. Right now what we are trying to do is that we are making the money purpose bound, so that this can be used only for those purposes. A partial, say if 100 rupees given, 20 rupees should be used necessarily for pesticides or fertilizers, based on the nature of the crop he is growing and all. So the purpose binding is one solution for which will happen. Now central bank digital currency is there, so we are now graduating. You would have heard about Unified Lending Interface, ULI, the UPI counterpart for lending. That is ULI. Reserve Bank of India is piloting that. So we are working with Reserve Bank, and this is necessarily a part of that ULI system as well. So digital means of verifying loans will come in. Now, the MSME activities, yes, when the cooperatives are active, they will have more information about that area, which is digitally captured because of the digitization process which we are doing. And going forward, I foresee that all the government of India schemes or the state government schemes will converge through cooperatives meant for rural areas. That convergence will happen. Government is waiting for the transparency in the sector, and along with transparency, governance improvement also will be coming in. And once that happens, then government is sure about that, then the convergence at the field level of all the government of India schemes targeted to the rural sector will happen through cooperatives.
We'll now close the thing now because I think we're running out of time. We had a very interesting talk, a lot of interesting questions. So we'll end it here. I'll just leave one thought behind. The last point which the speaker talked in his presentation was the concept of institutional design. We had insufficient discussion on the concept of institutional design. You know, I worked in China for 2 years. I set up Study Bank, and I had gone to a number of provinces in China and a number of cities in China. This was in 2005, 2006, 2008. You know, so China was still growing and still coming up, so it was not so arrogant, more open. And I saw how they behaved and how they were operating. And post-retirement, I was with the UNDP as a consultant for Asia and Africa, and we did projects in a number of countries. And I worked there. And combining the two thought process and what I'd seen in EXIM Bank and other things, a problem we all have, which China tackled through Deng Xiaoping's reforms in this thing, was everything is quite centralized here. There's a ministry there and ministry. In China, Deng Xiaoping decentralized governance and gave it to the towns and cities, not only the provinces, but also to the cities. So they became an owner. And the mayor was the owner and accountable and fully accountable for everything and anything. So whether it was rural education, that type of education there, or credit there, or misallocation, he was a chap who was filed. And it was not one chap in a large area, but one chap in a small town, you know, one city, that's it. Small geography. Because we have mammotic sizes, you know. Our population is 1,400 million or 1,400 lakhs, whatever, you know, 140 crores. All the development reports you have studied, all the histories and all the theories you have studied are from societies where the population was 20 million, 30 million, 15 million, 20, 40 million. Whether it is US, whether it is Europe, whether it is UK, they are small, tiny societies. And these are mammotic sizes. In mammotic sizes, what happens at a point here is not known to the center point there. And the institutional design is very, very important. And this is the last, see, I've been writing on this theme for a long time, and our institutional design is something we are talking not about policies and individual performances. You know, we tend to blame the politician in charge. That is not so much important as institutional design. And I'll leave this thought behind for all of you. Since you're young scholars, you should start thinking in terms of institutional design and comparing institutional design as it is divided by the population and divided by the geography. So a Korea, South Korea, centralized South Korea is different from a centralized India. So these thoughts I leave behind, and you can have that later on. But it was a very interesting talk. And as I mentioned, he's got a very interesting career. He's combining both agriculture and academia. So I think what he tried to communicate, you should dwell upon more. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the interesting lecture.
Now, you can also study whether democracy can be a spoiler here, because in Chinese Communist Party there is a steel frame.
No, it's not democracy. Democracy has nothing to do with it.
Because everybody has a right to tell whatever he wants.
No, there also, you say democracy is not that's a bogey. That we can have a separate discussion.
But as the current premier of China was the CEO of Shanghai. He developed Shanghai, and he was actually rewarded as a top.
Yeah, he came to Shanghai when I was there. He came as the mayor. No, he didn't develop Shanghai. He was one of the persons there. Yeah. But his performance was evaluated, and he was marked up, and he got a promotion, you know. And so no, it's not democracy, it's not the thing. People, if you are in charge, you will get a this thing on there. So institutional design is very important. A cooperative, for example, if it's a own, this, the cooperative control also. How do you disperse control? How do you centralize control in a cooperative? But if a cooperative has got ownership, then they like to do well. Even in cities, you got well-managed societies, poorly managed residential societies. It depends. So that design is very important, and the control within the is very important. It's a big topic.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for the interesting lecture. So we will just take 1 minute, additional minute. I would request Professor Ram Singh and Professor Surendra Kumar to join us on the stage and felicitate. Yeah. And I would also request the organizing committee member to come and for a photo. Rohit, Sandeep, Deepak, please.
Very good session. And you will make a very good professor. You have option of changing your profession if you would like.
I did PhD with an intention of that. After retirement, I can take up some personal practices.
Yes. It was very good blend of theory. There are many things. Yeah.
I think this was the session with maximum number of questions.
Yes. Yes, please. Right. So, we hope you can start.